a shadow falls across the galaxy. Not the shadow of ships or armies, but something far more ancient, far more terrible. In the depths of unknown space, an immortal evil stirs, its hunger spanning millennia, its patience boundless. It does not attack with fleets, it manipulates, it corrupts, it turns heroes into monsters and legends into nightmares. And in the center of this cosmic web sits one man, a Jedi Knight, who will become the galaxy's greatest savior, then its darkest conqueror, and finally something else entirely. His name will be spoken in whispers across 1,000 worlds. Some will call him hero, others will call him betrayer. The Mandalorians will call him the greatest warrior who ever lived. The Sith will call him Dark Lord. The Republic will call him both salvation and damnation. But before any of that, before the mask, before the betrayal, before the fall and the redemption, there was simply a question that would lead to the deaths of millions and reshape the fate of civilizations. One simple question that echoed through the Force itself. Why did the Jedi Council forbid them from saving the galaxy? When warriors from the Outer Rim began slaughtering entire species, when refugees flooded the core worlds with tales of genocide, when the Republic begged for help, the Jedi Masters said only, wait, meditate, trust the Force. But one young knight could not wait, and his choice, his defiance, would ignite a war that would burn for decades and touch every corner of known space. This is the story of the Jedi Civil War. A tale of friendship twisted into rivalry, of love born from deception, of power wielded for salvation that became damnation itself. A chronicle of how the greatest hero the galaxy had ever known became its greatest threat, and how in losing everything he would finally find redemption. But the true question remains, in the end, was he the villain or the hero? Or was he simply the only one willing to see the real enemy lurking in the shadows beyond the stars? Tonight we journey into one of the most epic and tragic sagas in Star Wars history, the complete timeline of the Jedi Civil War. From the Mandalorian Wars that forged a hero to the final battle at the Starforge that would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. This is a story of legendary warriors, impossible choices, and the thin line between salvation and tyranny. Now before we begin, I want to mention something. About 64% of you watching right now are not subscribed. If you enjoy these deep dives into Star Wars lore, these epic sleep stories that combine entertainment with relaxation, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It genuinely helps this channel grow and lets me create more content like this for you. And I would absolutely love to know. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are right now and what time it is where you are. Seriously, it fascinates me to think some of you might be in Australia at breakfast time, while others are in Europe late at night. Knowing this community spans the globe makes every story feel that much more special. So go ahead, like the video if you are enjoying it, subscribe if you have not already, and drop that comment. Let me know you are out there. Now get comfortable, dim those lights. Maybe turn on a soft fan for some background white noise. Pull up your blanket, settle into your pillows, and let your mind drift toward a galaxy far, far away. Tonight we explore legends. Tonight we uncover truths buried beneath millennia of secrets. Tonight we witness the rise and fall and rise again of the most complex hero Star Wars has ever known. Let us begin. The year is 3,976 years before the Battle of Yavin. Before the Empire, before the Clone Wars, before even the rule of two that would define the Sith for millennia to come. This is the era of the Old Republic, a time when the galaxy knew a peace it would not see again for generations. Coruscant gleams at the heart of known space, a planet wrapped entirely in cityscape, its surface lost beneath countless layers of civilization built upon civilization. Skyscrapers pierce the clouds, reaching towards stars they can barely see through the haze of billions of lives, lived in compressed vertical sprawl. The Senate towers stand as monuments to democracy, their debates shaping the fates of thousands of worlds. And above it all, both physically and spiritually, rises the Jedi Temple. The temple is more than a building. It is a beacon of the light side of the Force, a sanctuary of wisdom accumulated over thousands of years. Within its halls, Jedi Masters meditate on the nature of the Force itself, seeking guidance in visions and ancient texts. The archives contain the knowledge of entire civilizations, holocrons glowing with the preserved wisdom of long-dead masters, and in the training rooms, younglings practice the elegant and deadly art of lightsaber combat, their blades humming with contained energy. But peace, as always, is fragile. On the fringes of the galaxy, in the Outer Rim territories where Republic law grows thin and wild space begins, something is stirring. Reports filter back to Coruscant, fragmented and troubling. Mandalorian raiders attacking colony worlds. At first, the Senate dismisses these as isolated incidents. The Mandalorians, after all, are a warrior culture, prone to occasional outbursts of aggression. Surely this will pass. Surely they will grow tired and return to their own space. But the attacks do not stop. They intensify. Dantooine, far from Coruscant's glittering chaos, offers a different vision of the Jedi. Rolling grasslands stretch toward distant horizons, broken only by ancient ruins and the occasional crystalline formation. Here, away from politics and bureaucracy, the Jedi have built an enclave, a place of learning and meditation, where masters train Padawans in communion with the living Force. The wind whispers through the grass, carrying with it a sense of timeless tranquility. It is here that our story truly begins. Among the Jedi studying at the Dantooine Enclave are two friends whose names will echo through galactic history. One, a brilliant tactical mind, unconventional in his thinking, always questioning, always seeking deeper truths. The other, a powerful warrior, charismatic and bold, burning with a righteous desire to protect the innocent. They are inseparable, brothers in all but blood. Their names are Revan and Malak. They do not yet know that they will become legends. They do not yet know that one will betray the other. They do not yet know that together they will plunge the galaxy into a war that will nearly destroy the Republic itself. They do not yet know that their friendship will become the crucible in which the fate of trillions will be forged. But the Force knows. The Force always knows. And even now, as they train beneath Dantooine's open sky, the shadows of their future selves stretch long across the grass, dark and ominous, hinting at the terrible destiny that awaits them both. In the archives of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, an ancient historian sits alone among countless data terminals. This historian, whose name has been lost to time, pieces together fragments of a story that the galaxy has tried desperately to forget. Classified records, sealed testimonies, encrypted holocrons that should have remained buried forever. Slowly, painstakingly, the truth emerges from beneath layers of official lies and convenient omissions. This historian understands something that few others do. The Jedi Civil War was not an aberration. It was not a simple tale of a hero falling to darkness. It was something far more complex, far more tragic. It was the story of a man who saw a truth that others could not see, who made choices that others dared not make, and who paid a price that still echoes through the Force itself. The historian's fingers move across ancient controls, and a hollow image flickers to life. A masked figure stands against a backdrop of stars, his robes billowing in an unseen wind. The mask is featureless, emotionless, hiding the man beneath. But even through the recording, even across the centuries, the power radiating from this figure is unmistakable. Revan. The name itself carries weight. Hero, conqueror, redeemer. All of these and none of these. To understand what happened, to truly comprehend how the galaxy came so close to falling into eternal darkness, one must understand this man, not the legend, not the propaganda, the man. and the man began with a simple observation. The Jedi Council, in their infinite wisdom, were wrong. The first strike came without warning. Alpha 3, an industrialized world on the far edge of Republic space, became the testing ground for what would follow. The planet's factories had hummed with production for generations, feeding the Republic's economy with manufactured goods and technological components. Its people had known nothing but peace and prosperity. That peace died in fire. Mandalorian warships dropped out of hyperspace like predators descending on prey. Their hulls bore the distinctive markings of the Neo-Crusaders, a reformation of ancient Mandalorian warrior culture under a new leader who called himself Mandalore the Ultimate. The ships were brutal in their efficiency, designed not for elegance but for raw destructive power, and they brought that destruction to Althea 3 with terrifying precision. The battle lasted 5 days. 5 days of desperate resistance by people who had never trained for war, who had believed the galaxy's conflicts belonged to history. The Altheri forces held their ground with remarkable courage, forming defensive lines that should have crumbled but somehow held. They fought, not with the skill of professional soldiers, but with the determination of people protecting their homes, their families, their very existence. Among the Mandalorian forces was a young warrior named Canderous Ordor. He had been given orders to execute a feint, to draw enemy forces out of position with a false attack on their flank. It was a standard tactical maneuver, textbook warfare, but Canderous saw something his commanders had missed. A gap in the enemy formation, a momentary vulnerability in their defensive posture. He made a choice. Ignore orders and exploit the opening. His unit struck hard and fast, punching through the Altheri lines and forcing them to defend against assaults from multiple directions simultaneously. The defensive formation collapsed. Within hours, Mandalore's forces controlled the planet. Canderous had won his first major victory, and in doing so, he had demonstrated the very essence of Mandalorian philosophy. Adapt, overcome, victory at any cost. But this was just the beginning. Over the months and years that followed, Mandalorian raids intensified across the Outer Rim. Worlds that had known peace for generations suddenly found themselves under siege. Agricultural colonies burned, mining operations were seized, trade routes became killing grounds, and with each victory Mandalore the Ultimate's forces grew stronger, more confident, more audacious. The Mandalorian culture had always revered strength and combat prowess above all else. For centuries, they had been a warrior society, but one confined largely to their own space, occasionally hiring themselves out as mercenaries, but never pursuing large-scale conquest. That changed with Mandalore the Ultimate. He had a vision, not just raids for glory or resources, but systematic conquest. The building of an empire through military might. His Neo-Crusaders represented a reformation of Mandalorian identity, where once only the Tonk species could claim the title of Mandalorian. Mandalore the Ultimate opened membership to any species that could prove themselves in combat. The only requirements were strength, loyalty, and adherence to the Resolona, the 6 tenets of Mandalorian life. Wear the armor, speak the language, defend yourself and your family, raise your children as Mandalorians, contribute to the clan, rally when Mandalore calls. This openness transformed the Mandalorians from a single-species warrior cult into a multi-species military machine. Their numbers swelled, their reach extended, and their appetite for conquest grew insatiable. For years, the Republic Senate watched from afar. Debates stretched across weeks and months. Senators argued over jurisdiction, over whether these Outer Rim worlds even warranted military intervention, over the cost of deploying forces so far from the core. While they debated, worlds burned. While they discussed budgets and political ramifications, entire populations were enslaved or slaughtered. And the Jedi Council remained silent. On Coruscant, in the towering spires of the Jedi Temple, The council convened in their meditation chamber. Masters Vandar Tokare and Vruklamar sat among others, their expressions grave but their decision unwavering. When younger Jedi Knights came before them, begging for permission to aid the Republic's defense, the council's answer was always the same. No. Wait. Meditate. Trust in the Force. Master Vruk's words carried the weight of centuries of Jedi tradition. The Force shows us glimpses of the future, he explained to the assembled knights. And what we see in this conflict is not what it appears. The Mandalorians are attacking, yes, but they are not the true threat. Something deeper moves beneath the surface, something far more dangerous. If we intervene now, we may trigger events far worse than what we seek to prevent. Master Vandar, smaller in stature, but no less authoritative, added his voice. The path of the Jedi is not to rush into battle at every provocation. We are guardians of peace, not soldiers. If we allow ourselves to become an army, we lose what makes us Jedi. We become tools of politics rather than servants of the Force. The younger knights listened, but many did not understand. How could inaction be the right choice when millions were dying? How could meditation serve the light side when darkness was spreading unchecked across the galaxy? Among those who questioned most vocally was a knight named Revan. Even then, before the mask, before the legend, Revan stood apart from his peers. His tactical mind saw patterns others missed. His understanding of the Force went beyond simple manipulation of physical objects or enhancement of physical abilities. He saw connections, causality, the way one action rippled outward to affect thousands of others, and what he saw terrified him. The Mandalorians were not raiding randomly. Their attacks followed patterns. They were testing, probing, measuring the Republic's response time and military capability. This was not aggression born of cultural bloodlust. This was systematic intelligence gathering. Someone was directing them with purpose and precision. But when Revan brought these observations to the council, they dismissed him. Young and brilliant he might be, but he lacked the wisdom that came with decades of communion with the Force. He saw patterns because he wanted to see patterns. The truth, the council insisted, was more complex and could only be understood through patience and meditation. Revan left the council chambers that day changed. Not visibly, not in any way his peers might notice, but something inside him shifted. A seed of doubt took root. Not doubt in the Force itself, but doubt in those who claimed to speak for it. Standing beside him through these frustrations was Malak, taller, more physically imposing. Malak possessed raw power in the Force that few could match. Where Revan's strength lay in subtlety and precision, Malak's was in overwhelming force. They complemented each other perfectly. Revan's tactics combined with Malak's might made them formidable even as young knights. And Malak shared Revan's frustration completely. While the council meditated, people died. While masters debated philosophy, children were orphaned. The light side of the Force called Jedi to protect the innocent, to stand against darkness and oppression. How could sitting in a temple while atrocities occurred possibly serve the light? Together, Revan and Malak began speaking quietly to other young knights, not openly defying the council, not yet, but asking questions, sharing their concerns, finding others who felt the same gnawing frustration that enforced inaction. They called themselves the Revanchists, a name chosen deliberately. Revanche meant vengeance in an old language, but it also meant justice for past wrongs. They would be the answer to the council's inaction. They would be the sword that defended those the Republic had abandoned. But they needed a catalyst, something so horrifying, so undeniable, that even the council could not ignore it. Something that would force the galaxy to recognize the true nature of the threat they faced. That catalyst was coming. On a world called Cathar, the Mandalorians were preparing to send a message written in blood and fire, a message that would change everything. A message that would finally push Revan and Malak past the point of no return and set in motion events that would reshape galactic history forever. 3,964 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Mandalorians stopped testing and began their true invasion. The attacks that had plagued the Outer Rim for over a decade suddenly intensified beyond anything the Republic had seen. 3 massive invasion corridors opened simultaneously, each one commanded by elite Mandalorian strategists and supported by hundreds of warships. This was no longer raiding, this was conquest on a scale that threatened to overwhelm the Republic's ability to respond. The Senate finally acted, authorizing military deployment to contested regions. But they were too late, far, far too late. The Mandalorians had used their years of raids to map every Republic defense, to identify every weak point, to understand exactly how long it took for reinforcements to arrive at any given location. When the full invasion came, it moved with surgical precision, exploiting gaps the Republic didn't even know existed. Taris, a massive ecumenopolis in the Outer Rim, found itself under siege. The planet's surface was covered entirely in cityscape, layers upon layers of urban development stretching from the gleaming towers where the wealthy lived down to the dark undercity where the poor struggled to survive. Millions called Taris home, and now all of them were trapped as Mandalorian forces blockaded the planet and prepared for a ground assault. But before Taris fell, before the invasion corridors cut deep into Republic space, something else happened. Something that would haunt Revan for the rest of his life and beyond. The Cathar genocide. Cathar was homeworld to the feline Cathar species, a people known for their honor, their loyalty, and their fierce warrior tradition. They were not helpless civilians. They had fought bravely against the Mandalorian advance, holding their world when others had fallen. And for that defiance, Mandalore the Ultimate decided to make an example of them. The orders were explicit and horrifying. Not occupation, not conquest, extermination. Mandalorian forces descended on Cathar with overwhelming numbers. They systematically hunted down every Cathar they could find. Men, women, children. It made no difference. The Mandalorians had been ordered to erase an entire species from existence, and they followed those orders with brutal efficiency. Those who tried to surrender were killed. Those who tried to flee were hunted down. Those who fought were overwhelmed and slaughtered. The few survivors managed to escape off-world, carrying with them holocron recordings of what had happened. These recordings made their way to the Republic, to the Jedi, to anyone who would listen, and what they showed was beyond comprehension. Fields of bodies, cities burned to ash. An entire civilization systematically destroyed. When Revan saw those recordings, something inside him broke. He had argued for intervention for years. He had presented evidence of Mandalorian patterns and strategies. He had warned that inaction would lead to catastrophe, and the Council had told him to wait, to trust, to have patience. Now an entire species had been nearly wiped from existence, and the Council's response was still the same. Meditate, trust the Force. Do not act in anger. But this was not anger. This was clarity. Revan understood in that moment that the Council was paralyzed by their own fear. They sensed something dark in the Force connected to this conflict, and that sensing had frozen them into inaction. They were so afraid of triggering some greater catastrophe that they were allowing a current catastrophe to unfold unchecked, and while they waited for perfect knowledge of the future, millions were dying in the present. He went to Malak that night. His friend was in the training halls, working through lightsaber forms with an intensity that bordered on fury. Malak had seen the Cathar recordings too. Every Jedi in the temple had. The images were impossible to forget. The conversation that followed was brief. No lengthy philosophical debate, no careful weighing of options. Revan simply asked a question. If we do nothing, how many more worlds will burn? How many more species will be erased? How many more people will die? while the Council meditates on mysteries they may never solve. Malak's answer was immediate. Where you lead, I will follow. Always. The decision was made. Over the following weeks, Revan began speaking openly to other Jedi Knights. Not in secret anymore, not in whispered conversations in dark corners. He spoke in the temple's common areas, in the training halls anywhere young Jedi gathered. His words were simple but devastating in their logic. The Jedi Code calls us to defend those who cannot defend themselves. We have the power to stop this genocide, to save billions of lives, to stand between innocent people and those who would destroy them. The Council orders us to do nothing, to trust that their inaction serves some greater purpose we cannot see. But I ask you this, if we have the power to save lives, and we choose not to act, are we not complicit in those deaths? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of Jedi Knights, many of them young but some experienced masters among them, came to Revan pledging their support. They would defy the Council. They would leave the Order if necessary. But they would not stand idle while the galaxy burned. Among the first to pledge was a Jedi named Mitra Surik. Later history would know her as the Jedi Exile. But at this moment, she was simply a skilled knight with an unshakable sense of justice. When Revan spoke of duty and action, she heard truth. When he called for Jedi to honor their purpose rather than their fear, she answered without hesitation. Others followed. Jedi from across the Order, representing dozens of species and worlds, all united by a single conviction: the Council was wrong. Action was required. And if the Order would not act, then they would act without the Order. The Council called Revan before them one final time. Master Vrok's voice was heavy with disappointment and warning. You stand at a precipice, young Revan. If you step off this ledge, there is no climbing back. Once you lead Jedi into war, once you place yourself above the Council's wisdom, you begin walking a path that leads only to darkness. Master Vandar added his voice, softer, but no less serious. We understand your frustration. We even share it, but you see only the immediate crisis. The Force shows us deeper patterns, older threats. The Mandalorians are being manipulated by something far more dangerous. If you intervene now, you may be playing into that greater threat's plans. You may be doing exactly what it wants you to do. Revan listened respectfully. Then he spoke words that would echo through history. I would rather act and risk being wrong than remain still and guarantee being complicit. The Force may show you mysteries and hidden threats, masters, but it shows me something simpler: people suffering, people dying, and people I have the power to save. If that path leads to darkness, then I will walk carefully, but I will walk it. He turned to leave, and hundreds of Jedi Knights stood and followed him. The departure from the Dantooine Enclave was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Jedi who had trained together for years now found themselves on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. Some masters wept openly as their former students left, knowing they might never see them again. Other masters watched in stony silence, their disappointment and fear written across their features. Master Kava, one of the few council members who had expressed sympathy for Revan's position, stood at the Enclave's entrance as the Revanchists departed. His final words to Revan were prophetic. Once you step into war's shadow, it never releases you. You may save the galaxy, Revan, but you will lose yourself in the process. Remember this warning when the darkness calls. Remember that we tried to save you from this path. Revan placed a hand on the older master's shoulder. Then save the galaxy while I am gone. Master Kava, prove me wrong. Show me that meditation and patience can stop genocide. I would be overjoyed to learn I was mistaken. But they both knew no such proof would come. As hundreds of Jedi departed Dantooine, as their ships lifted into the sky and jumped to hyperspace, the Mandalorian Wars transformed from a Republic military conflict into something far more significant. The Jedi had entered the war, and once the Jedi entered, there was no turning back for anyone. The moment Revan and his followers joined the Republic military, the war changed. For years, Republic forces had fought defensively, reacting to Mandalorian attacks, always one step behind, always struggling to contain rather than defeat. Revan looked at the same situation and saw opportunity where others saw only crisis. He understood something fundamental that military commanders trained in conventional doctrine had missed. The Mandalorians were predictable precisely because they were so skilled. Their warrior culture valued honor in combat, direct confrontation, testing themselves against worthy opponents. They followed patterns rooted in thousands of years of tradition, and patterns could be exploited. The first major engagement under Revan's command was the liberation of Taris. The Ecumenopolis had been under Mandalorian blockade for months, its people starving, its defenses crumbling. Republic naval commanders had attempted 3 separate relief efforts, and all 3 had been turned back with heavy losses. The Mandalorian fleet surrounding Taris was simply too strong, too well positioned, too tactically sound to break through. Revan studied the situation for 3 days. He reviewed every failed attack, analyzed every Mandalorian response, mapped every ship movement, and then he did something no Republic commander had considered. He stopped trying to break the blockade. Instead, he sent a small task force to attack Mandalorian supply lines 3 systems away. Nothing major, just enough to draw attention. The Mandalorians, as he predicted, dispatched a portion of their fleet to defend their logistics chain. After all, a warrior culture understood that armies needed supplies. It was the tactically sound response. While those ships were in transit, Revan struck at Taris with overwhelming force, concentrating his entire fleet on the temporarily weakened blockade. The Mandalorians fought with their customary ferocity, but they were outnumbered and caught between defending their position and recalling their dispersed forces. The blockade shattered. Relief supplies poured onto Taris. Revan's forces held orbit long enough to evacuate critical civilians and wounded, then withdrew before the Mandalorian reinforcements could return. It was not just a victory, it was a statement. The Mandalorians could be beaten. Their vaunted military prowess was not invincible. They were warriors, yes, but warriors followed patterns, and patterns could be broken. Word of Taris spread through both Republic and Mandalorian forces. For Republic soldiers who had known nothing but retreat and defeat, it was the first genuine hope they had felt in years. For the Mandalorians, it was something else. Curiosity. This Jedi commander fought unlike any opponent they had faced. He thought like they did, anticipated their moves, understood their culture well enough to exploit it. The victories continued. At Onderon, Revan coordinated a defense that held off a force 3 times the size of his own. He used the planet's complex political situation to his advantage, forging alliances with local forces and turning Onderon's orbital defenses into a killing field for Mandalorian ships. The battle lasted for weeks, but when it ended, the Mandalorians retreated, leaving behind shattered fleets and a grudging respect for this new adversary. Surja, a system the Mandalorians had held for years, fell to Revan's forces in less than a week. He had studied the occupying forces' routine, identified the exact moment their patrols rotated, and struck during that brief vulnerability. The garrison never had time to mount an organized defense. Republic Supreme Chancellor Tol Kressa, watching these victories from Coruscant, made a decision that would alter galactic history. In 3,962 years before the Battle of Yavin, he officially appointed Revan as Supreme Commander of Republic forces. A Jedi, not a career military officer, now held ultimate authority over the largest army in the galaxy. Some senators objected. Giving such power to someone who had defied the Jedi Council seemed reckless. But the soldiers loved him. The people whose worlds he had liberated sang his praises, and most importantly, he was winning. For a republic that had known nothing but loss, That was enough. But victory came with a price that Revan was only beginning to understand. War changes people. The first time you order an attack knowing that people will die, that weight settles on your soul. The first time you sacrifice a battalion to save a planet, you tell yourself it was necessary, and it was, but necessity does not erase the cost. Each decision, each tactical choice that traded lives for objectives, carved away another piece of the idealistic young Jedi who had left Dantooine convinced he was doing the right thing. Revan began to notice it in small ways. The way he calculated casualties as numbers rather than people. The ease with which he could order a risky maneuver, knowing some ships would not return. The cold logic that valued strategic position over individual lives. He was becoming an effective commander, but he was losing something essential in the process. It was during the investigation of the Cathar massacre site that Revan found something that would define his future. He had insisted on visiting Cathar personally, against the advice of his officers. They argued it served no strategic purpose, that the Mandalorians had long since abandoned the devastated world. But Revan needed to see it, needed to understand what had driven the Mandalorians to commit such an atrocity, needed to confront the reality of what he was fighting against. The surface of Cathar was a graveyard. Bodies had been left where they fell, a deliberate message from the Mandalorians. This is what happens to those who resist us. The scale of death was incomprehensible. Everywhere Revan looked, evidence of systematic slaughter. But among the ruins, he found something else. A Mandalorian computer terminal, partially destroyed but still functional. Revan's technical expertise, honed through years of studying everything from ancient Sith artifacts to modern technology, allowed him to extract data that military intelligence officers had missed. What he discovered chilled him more than the massacre itself. The Cathar genocide had been ordered. Mandalore the Ultimate had not simply allowed his forces to run wild. He had specifically commanded the extermination of the species, and the reason was recorded in the terminal's logs. A test. The Cathar genocide was a test to see if the Mandalorians would follow orders that violated their own code of honor. But more disturbing still, the order itself referenced something else, something outside Mandalorian space. A phrase appeared multiple times in the encrypted files: unknown regions, the true enemy, preparation. Revan spent days analyzing those files, pulling fragments of data from damaged systems, piecing together a pattern that horrified him. The Mandalorians were not attacking the Republic because of cultural bloodlust or simple desire for conquest. They were being directed. Someone or something in the unknown regions was manipulating Mandalore the Ultimate, using the Mandalorians to test the Republic's military capabilities. The raids that had preceded the invasion, they were probing attacks, measuring response times, the invasion corridors. They were designed to identify weak points in Republic defenses. Even the Cathar genocide served a purpose, testing whether the Mandalorians could be made to commit any atrocity if ordered, breaking down their cultural restraints. The Mandalorians were pawns, and the Republic by extension was being studied, analyzed, prepared for something worse. When Revan brought this intelligence to Republic Command, they dismissed it. The threat in front of them was real and immediate. Speculation about hidden puppet masters in uncharted space was not actionable intelligence. Focus on winning the war at hand, they told him. Worry about hypothetical future threats after the Mandalorians are defeated. But Revan could not dismiss it. The Force whispered to him in his meditations, though he could no longer tell if those whispers came from the light side or something darker. There was truth in that data, a threat so vast that the Mandalorian wars were merely preparation for its emergence. And if that was true, defeating the Mandalorians was not enough. He would need to be ready for what came after. It was on Cathar that Revan found the mask that would become his symbol. Not Mandalore's mask. Not yet, but the helmet of a Mandalorian woman who had died trying to prevent the genocide. She had been killed by her own people for showing mercy, for refusing orders. Her mask lay among the ruins, a reminder of honor lost in service to orders that should never have been followed. Revan picked up that mask and understood something profound. The Mandalorians respected strength. They followed the strong without question, without hesitation. If he wanted to truly defeat them, he needed to become what they respected, not just a tactical genius, but a symbol, a warrior who commanded their admiration even as he destroyed them. He made a decision that would haunt him forever. He would wear a mask, not this one, but one forged from it, combined with other elements, creating something new. A symbol that would strike fear into Mandalorian hearts while hiding the man beneath. A way of becoming more than Revan the Jedi, becoming something larger, something that could carry the weight of what he knew was coming. When he returned to the fleet wearing that mask for the first time, his officers were shocked. Malak, seeing his friend's face hidden behind cold metal, felt something twist in his chest. Pride, yes, at Revan's tactical brilliance, but also something else. A distance opening between them. His friend was still there, but he was also becoming someone else. Someone harder, someone capable of things the young Jedi from Dantooine would have refused to consider. The mask never came off after that. In strategy meetings, in combat, in private meditation, Revan wore it constantly, until even he began to forget what his own face looked like. He told himself it was tactical, psychological warfare. But the truth ran deeper. The mask allowed him to make decisions that Revan the person could not make. It created distance between his actions and his conscience. And that distance would grow wider with every battle, every victory, every choice that sacrificed the few for the many. The Republic was winning the war, but Revan was losing himself, piece by piece, decision by decision, until the day would come when he could no longer tell where the mask ended and the man began. Between 3,962 and 3,961 years before the Battle of Yavin, the character of the war shifted from desperate defense to calculated offense. Republic forces, emboldened by Revan's victories and swelling with new recruits inspired by his legend, began pushing the Mandalorians back across dozens of fronts. Systems that had suffered under occupation for years suddenly found themselves liberated. Trade routes reopened. Refugees began the long journey home to worlds that had been written off as lost. But liberation came with a cost that few understood at the time. Serroco was a thriving agricultural world in the Outer Rim, its vast plains providing food for dozens of neighboring systems. When the Mandalorians invaded, the local defense forces fought valiantly, holding key positions while calling desperately for Republic support. Revan had dispatched a relief fleet, but the distances were vast, and even at maximum hyperspace speed, his ships would need days to arrive. The Mandalorians knew the fleet was coming. They had their own intelligence networks, their own ways of tracking Republic ship movements, and they made a decision that would become infamous throughout the galaxy. If they could not hold Serroco, they would make sure the Republic gained nothing from its liberation. Nuclear weapons, weapons that had been banned by galactic convention for centuries. Weapons that most civilizations had agreed should never be used regardless of military necessity. The Mandalorians deployed them across Serroco's surface, targeting population centers with systematic precision. When Revan's fleet arrived, they found a world dying. Mushroom clouds still rose from impact sites. Radiation levels made atmosphere entry suicidal, and on the few communication channels still functioning, the screams of the dying echoed into space. 4 million people, 4 million civilians who had done nothing except have the misfortune of living on a strategically valuable world, dead in a matter of hours. Revan stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the planet below shrouded in nuclear fire, and something inside him crystallized. The Mandalorians were not just warriors following a code. They were capable of atrocities that transcended any notion of honorable combat. They would burn entire worlds rather than accept defeat. And if that was the enemy he faced, then he could not afford to fight with restraint. The officers around him waited for orders, for direction, for some response to the nightmare unfolding before them. Revan's voice, filtered through his mask, was cold and emotionless. "Mark Sirocco as a loss. Continue to the next objective. We cannot save the dead, only prevent more deaths by ending this war faster." It was the correct tactical decision, but the ease with which he made it, the speed with which he moved past 4 million deaths to focus on the next battle, that should have been a warning. To his officers, to his friend Malak standing beside him, to Revan himself. But warnings go unheeded when victory seems within reach. Jebel became another nightmare of a different kind. The planet hosted a Republic military installation when the Mandalorians attacked, and the fighting was fierce. Republic forces held their ground, inflicting heavy casualties on the attackers, but during the battle, something else emerged. A plague, the Rakghoul virus, an ancient Sith bioweapon that transformed living beings into mindless infectious monsters. The virus spread through both Republic and Mandalorian forces with horrifying speed. Within days, the entire planet was infested. Soldiers on both sides, civilians caught in the combat zones, everyone exposed became carriers. The infection rate approached 100%. Revan faced an impossible choice. The Republic had protocols for biological contamination, quarantine the affected area, provide medical support from orbit, work to develop a cure or treatment. Those were the rules, the procedures developed over centuries to balance compassion with security. But following those procedures meant leaving a planet full of infected individuals who could potentially spread the virus if any ship escaped quarantine. It meant dedicating medical resources and research teams to a cure that might take years to develop. It meant accepting that Jebel would serve as a reservoir for a plague that could devastate the galaxy if it ever broke containment. Revan made his decision: total orbital bombardment, sterilize the surface from space, ensure that nothing, not the virus, not the infected, not even the bacteria in the soil, survived. When Malak heard the order, he objected. These were Republic soldiers down there. Their own people. Surely there had to be another way, some possibility of rescue or treatment. Revan's response was mathematical. 3,000 Republic soldiers and 10,000 civilians are on Jebel. If we attempt rescue, we risk the virus spreading to the fleet, then to other worlds. The potential death toll could reach billions. 3,000 versus billions is not a difficult calculation. The bombardment lasted for hours. When it ended, Jebel's surface was molten glass. Nothing survived. Nothing could survive. And Revan felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no emotional reaction whatsoever. The mask hid his face, but even beneath it, his expression remained neutral. It had been necessary. The math was clear. The decision was correct. That absence of feeling should have terrified him. It did not. Malak watched his friend order the extermination of their own forces and saw something he had never seen before. A willingness to sacrifice anyone, anything, for victory. Malak told himself it was strength. The strength to make impossible choices. The strength that would win the war. But deep inside, in a place he would not acknowledge even to himself, Malak felt the first stirrings of fear, not of the enemy, of Revan. The victories continued to mount. Republic forces grew from hundreds of ships to thousands. Every successful liberation brought new recruits, new resources, new industrial capacity. Revan's strategic genius, combined with overwhelming numerical superiority, began to turn what had been a desperate defensive war into a campaign of systematic reconquest. But those closest to Revan began to notice changes. He spoke less frequently without his mask. His orders became more absolute. Brooks, no discussion or alternative suggestions. The tactical brilliance remained, perhaps even enhanced, but the compassion that had driven him to defy the Council was gradually being replaced by something colder, more calculating. Some of the Jedi who had followed him from Dantooine began to express concerns. Mitra Surik, loyal as she was, found herself troubled by orders that seemed to value efficiency over morality. Others whispered among themselves about the cost of victory, about whether winning the war was worth losing themselves in the process. These concerns reached Malak, who served as Revan's second in command and closest confidant. And Malak made a choice that would haunt him. He said nothing. To Revan, to the concerned Jedi, to anyone. He told himself it was loyalty. Revan had led them this far, delivered victories everyone said were impossible, transformed a losing war into a winnable one. Questioning him now, undermining his authority, would damage the very unity that made their success possible. But the truth was more complex. Malak was changing too. The power that came with command, the rush of victory, the intoxication of being part of something larger than himself. He did not want it to stop. And if Revan's methods became harsh, well, the Mandalorians were harsher. If Revan made cold calculations about acceptable casualties, well, was that not what generals had always done? The rationalizations came easily, too easily. By 3961, the Mandalorians were in full retreat. System after system fell to Republic forces. The invasion corridors that had brought the Mandalorians deep into Republic space were now avenues for counterattack, driving the warriors back toward their own territories. Mandalore, the ultimate, watching his grand conquest collapse, made his own calculations. The Republic, or more specifically this masked Jedi leading their forces, was too skilled, too relentless, too willing to match Mandalorian ruthlessness with his own brand of calculated brutality. But surrender was not in the Mandalorian vocabulary. Retreat in the face of superior strategy was acceptable. Acknowledging a worthy opponent was part of their code, but giving up was not. The Mandalore began consolidating his forces, pulling back from untenable positions, gathering his strength for a final confrontation. If the Mandalorians were to be defeated, they would be defeated in open battle, not picked apart system by system. And Revan, seeing the pattern of Mandalorian withdrawal, understood exactly what his opponent was planning. A decisive engagement. A final battle where the full might of both forces would clash, and the victor would determine the outcome of the entire war. The location of that battle was being carefully chosen by Mandalore, a place of significance, a place where the dark side of the Force pooled like shadow given substance, a place whose very name would become synonymous with catastrophic loss and terrible choices. Malachor 5. Neither Revan nor Mandalore fully understood what that world represented. Neither knew the role it would play, not just in ending the Mandalorian wars, but in transforming Revan from the Republic's savior into something far more dangerous. The pieces were moving into position. The final act of the Mandalorian wars was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same. 3,960 years before the Battle of Yavin marked the end of one era and the beginning of something far darker. The Mandalorian forces had retreated to the Outer Rim, consolidating around their strongholds in the systems near Dexon and Onderon. These were not panicked withdrawals or chaotic routes. Mandalore the Ultimate was gathering his strength, calling in every warrior clan, every ship, every resource his people could muster. The final battle was coming, and both sides knew it. Revan pursued relentlessly. There would be no respite, no time for the Mandalorians to rebuild their strength or reassess their strategy. Every day of delay meant more time for them to fortify their positions, to call in reinforcements from distant systems, to prepare defenses that would cost Republic lives to overcome. The campaign leading to Onderon was brutal. World after world fell to Republic forces, and Revan's tactical approach had evolved into something that disturbed even his own officers. He no longer sought merely to defeat Mandalorian forces. He sought to break them utterly, to destroy their will to fight, to make resistance so costly that surrender became the only logical option. But Mandalorians did not think logically. They thought like warriors. The battle for Onderon and its moon Daxon became legendary even as it unfolded. The moon served as Mandalore's primary base, its jungles hiding training camps and supply depots that had fed the Mandalorian war machine for years. The planet itself was caught in complex political struggles, with some factions supporting the Mandalorians and others loyal to the Republic. Revan's forces struck with overwhelming coordination. Republic ships blockaded Onderon's orbit while ground forces assaulted Mandalorian positions on Daxon. The fighting in those jungles was savage. Mandalorians in their armor, intimate with the terrain, made every meter cost blood. Republic soldiers, many of them veterans of years of warfare, pushed forward with grim determination. But the ground campaign was not the main objective. It was a distraction. While Republic forces engaged on Daxon, Revan took a single ship down to the moon's surface, accompanied only by his closest Jedi followers and Malak. His target was Mandalore the Ultimate himself. The warrior chieftain would not hide while his forces fought. He would be in the thick of battle, leading from the front as Mandalorian culture demanded. Finding him was not difficult. Mandalore wanted to be found. He had been waiting for this confrontation, perhaps had been orchestrating the entire retreat specifically to bring about this moment. A final duel between leaders, winner take all. They met in a clearing carved by battle, surrounded by the wreckage of war machines and the bodies of fallen warriors from both sides. Mandalore the Ultimate stood nearly 2 meters tall, his armor scarred by countless battles, his presence radiating the absolute confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat in personal combat. Revan, masked and silent, ignited his lightsaber. The blade hummed to life, casting shadows across his concealing armor. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The duel that followed would be retold in Mandalorian clans for generations. Mandalore fought with a Biscad, a traditional Mandalorian warblade, combining it with his armor's weapon systems and decades of combat experience. He was strength incarnate, every strike delivered with killing force, every movement precise and practiced. Revan fought with something else. Not just skill, though his lightsaber technique was flawless. Not just force powers, though he used them with devastating effect. He fought with absolute understanding of his opponent. Every Mandalorian move followed patterns, traditions, techniques passed down through generations, and Revan had studied those patterns for years. He knew where Mandalore would strike before the warrior moved. He understood which attacks were feints and which were genuine. He had mapped every possible response Mandalore could make and prepared counters for each one. It was not a fair fight. It was a dissection. When Mandalore fell, brought down by a strike that bypassed his armor's weak points with surgical precision, his final words changed everything. "I was told this would bring us glory, that attacking your republic would prove our strength." The voice came from the unknown regions, the Sith, an emperor older than memory itself. We were pawns, all of us. Pawns in a game we never understood. Revan stood over the dying warrior, these words hitting him with more force than any physical blow could have. Everything he had discovered on Cathar, every suspicion about hidden manipulation, all of it confirmed by the Mandalorian leader's last confession. There was something else out there, something that had orchestrated this entire war for purposes Revan could only guess at. And if Mandalore could be manipulated, used as a tool to weaken the Republic, then what else might this mysterious Sith Emperor be capable of? Revan took Mandalore's mask, the symbol of Mandalorian leadership, the artifact that granted authority over all the clans. In Mandalorian culture, Claiming the mask meant claiming the right to lead. Revan understood the symbolism. The Mandalorians would not follow him, but they would recognize that their leader had fallen in honorable combat, and they would accept defeat. But there was still one more battle to fight. One more act in this tragedy. Mandalore's dying words had included coordinates. A world called Malachor 5. He said the Sith Emperor had directed him there, told him it was a place of power where the final battle should occur. Revan's intelligence confirmed that the remaining Mandalorian fleet was indeed gathering at those coordinates. Every tactical instinct told Revan this was a trap, but every strategic calculation told him he had no choice but to spring it. The Mandalorians needed to be defeated completely, their military capacity shattered beyond any hope of resurgence. If they were gathering at Malachor 5, then that was where the war would end. The Republic fleet, swollen to thousands of ships after years of successful campaigns, made the jump to hyperspace. When they emerged at Malachor 5, they found exactly what they expected: the largest concentration of Mandalorian warships assembled since the beginning of the invasion. Every clan had sent representatives. Every warrior who could still fight had answered the call. But they also found something else. Something Revan had not expected and could not have predicted. Malachor 5 was not just a planet. It was a wound in the Force itself. Ancient Sith had built an academy there, millennia before, harnessing the dark side energy that permeated the world. The surface was a wasteland of jagged rock and perpetual storms, but beneath it, in the depths of the Treyas Academy's ruins, knowledge waited. Dark knowledge, terrible knowledge. Revan felt the pull immediately. The Force here did not flow naturally. It was twisted, corrupted, calling to anyone strong enough in the Force to hear its whispers. And those whispers promised power. The power to win any battle. The power to defeat any enemy. The power to save the galaxy from threats visible and hidden. All he had to do was reach out and take it. The space battle began before Revan could explore the planet below. Mandalorian and Republic fleets crashed together in an engagement that dwarfed anything the war had yet seen. Thousands of ships exchanged fire across the entire system. Fighters dueled between capital vessels. Boarding parties attempted desperate assaults. The space around Malachor 5 became a killing field. And Revan, standing on his flagship's bridge, felt torn between two imperatives: win this battle, or investigate what waited on the planet below. The Force screamed at him that the truth he sought, the answer to how to defeat the hidden Sith Emperor, lay in those ruins. But abandoning command during the most critical battle of the war was unthinkable. He made a decision that would haunt him. He would do both. Leaving Malak in command of the fleet, Revan took a strike team down to Malachor 5's surface. What he found in the Treyas Academy changed him forever. Ancient holocrons containing Sith teachings, techniques for manipulating the Force in ways the Jedi had never conceived, and most importantly, information about the Sith Emperor who had manipulated the Mandalorians. The Emperor was real, ancient beyond measure, ruling a hidden Sith empire in the unknown regions, biding his time, building his strength. The Mandalorian Wars had been his test, his way of measuring the Republic's military capacity and the Jedi's resolve. And soon, when he judged the time right, he would invade with forces that would make the Mandalorian Wars look like a minor skirmish. Revan understood in that moment that defeating the Mandalorians was not enough. The Republic was not ready for what was coming. They had no conception of the threat waiting beyond their borders. And if he told them, if he warned them, they would not believe him. Just as they had not believed him about the Mandalorians until entire worlds burned. He needed power, real power. Not just military authority, but the kind of power that could unite the galaxy, that could prepare civilization itself for what was coming. And that power waited here, in these ancient teachings, in the dark side knowledge that the Sith had accumulated over millennia. Standing in the heart of the Traya's Academy, surrounded by the echoes of ancient evil, Revan reached out and touched the dark side deliberately for the first time, not by accident, not through anger or fear, but through calculated choice. He needed this power. The galaxy needed him to have this power. The corruption was instant and insidious. The dark side did not announce itself. It simply became part of his thinking, part of his reasoning, until he could no longer tell where his own thoughts ended and the darkness's influence began. Above, in orbit, the battle had reached a critical point. Malakir, commanding in Revan's absence, faced impossible odds. The Mandalorians were fighting with the desperate ferocity of warriors who knew this was their last stand. Republic ships were being destroyed faster than they could regroup. It was General Mitra Surik who presented Malak with the option that would end the battle. A weapon, something discovered in Republic archives, a prototype that had never been deployed because its power was too terrible, its consequences too extreme. The mass shadow generator. In simple terms, it was a gravity weapon. It could manipulate a planet's mass shadow, the gravitational field that ships use to navigate hyperspace. But at maximum power, it could turn that gravity field into a weapon of unimaginable destruction, creating a localized gravity well so intense that nothing could escape it. Malak understood immediately what deploying such a weapon would mean. Every ship in the system, Republic and Mandalorian alike, would be pulled into Malakar V's gravity well and crushed. Thousands of ships, millions of lives, including many of their own forces. He contacted Mitra Surik, who was aboard one of the Republic ships in position to activate the weapon. The order he gave was simple and terrible. Do it. Mitra hesitated. These were their own people, their own Jedi, their own soldiers, their own crews, but she also understood the mathematics. If they did not end this battle now, if they allowed it to continue, the casualties would be even higher. And if the Mandalorians somehow won, everything would be lost. She activated the mass shadow generator. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Malakor V's gravity field amplified beyond anything natural, creating a pull that nothing could resist. Ships by the hundreds were dragged toward the planet's surface, hulls crumpling under gravitational stress, systems failing, crews screaming as their vessels disintegrated around them. The planet itself began tearing apart. The surface cracked open. Mountains collapsed into themselves. The ancient Traya's Academy, which had stood for millennia, shattered and fell into newly formed chasms. And every Jedi within 1,000 light-years felt it through the Force. Millions of deaths, all at once. A scream in the Force so loud that some Jedi went mad from it. Mitra Surik, at the epicenter, felt every single death personally. The weight of all those lives ending simultaneously ripped her connection to the Force away, severing her from the power she had known all her life. Revan, deep in the Traya's Academy, when the weapon activated, felt the deaths too, but he did not go mad. He did not lose his connection to the Force. Instead, he absorbed that energy, that massive wave of death and suffering, and he used it to amplify his own power, to cement his connection to the dark side, to transform himself from a Jedi general into something else entirely. When he emerged from the ruins, rescued by ships that had somehow survived the Holocaust, he was no longer the person who had descended to the surface. The dark side had taken root completely, and the worst part was, he still believed he was doing it for the right reasons, that this power, this terrible corrupting power, was necessary to save the galaxy from the Emperor waiting in the unknown regions. The Mandalorian wars were over. The survivors scattered across the galaxy, their leadership broken, their military capacity destroyed. Revan stood victorious, having saved the Republic from conquest and potential extinction. But the cost was incalculable. A planet shattered, millions dead, many of them the very Republic forces he had led to victory. The Jedi Order traumatized by mass death on a scale they had never experienced, and Revan himself transformed from hero into something that would soon become far more dangerous than the Mandalorians had ever been. Standing on his flagship, staring at the broken remains of Malachor V through his mask, Revan spoke words that only Malak heard. "The war is over, but my work has just begun. The real enemy waits beyond our borders, and if the Republic is to survive, I must become strong enough to defeat him. Whatever that requires, whatever it costs." Malak looked at his friend and realized with cold certainty that he no longer recognized the person standing beside him. The Jedi who had defied the Council to save innocent lives had died somewhere in the Treyas Academy. What had emerged was something else. Something powerful and terrible and absolutely certain of its own righteousness. And that certainty, that absolute conviction that the ends justified any means, would soon plunge the galaxy into a new war that would make the Mandalorian wars look merciful by comparison. The victory celebrations on Coruscant lasted for weeks. Parades filled the streets. Senators gave speeches praising the Republic's resilience and the courage of its defenders. Monuments were commissioned to honor the fallen. The Mandalorian Wars, which had threatened the very existence of galactic civilization, had ended in total Republic victory. But the heroes of that war were nowhere to be found. Revan and Malak had vanished. No announcements, no farewells, no explanation. Their flagship simply disappeared from Republic space, its destination unknown, its purpose a mystery. The Jedi Council, when pressed for information, remained silent. The military command structure Revan had built began to fracture in his absence, officers arguing over who should assume overall authority. The Republic tried to move forward, tried to rebuild from years of devastating warfare, but questions lingered. Where had their savior gone? Why had he abandoned them at the moment of triumph? The truth was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Revan had taken a single ship, the Ebon Hawk, a light freighter he had acquired during the war for its speed and reliability. Malak accompanied him, along with a handful of others. Their stated destination was classified, but Revan's real purpose was something he could barely articulate even to himself. Mandalore's dying words haunted him. The Sith Emperor. The hidden threat. The hidden threat. The being who had orchestrated the Mandalorian Wars as merely a test of Republic defenses. That threat remained, and Revan understood that the Republic was completely unprepared for it. But there was another truth he would not admit, even in his most private thoughts. The dark side power he had touched on Malachor V called to him, whispered promises of greater knowledge, deeper understanding, the kind of strength that could face down any enemy. He told himself he was investigating the Emperor, seeking intelligence on this hidden threat. The reality was more complex. He was drawn to it, compelled by something he could no longer fully control. The journey into the unknown regions was unlike anything they had experienced. Hyperspace lanes were unreliable or non-existent. Navigation required constant recalculation, and the Force itself felt different here, twisted and strange, as if the very fabric of reality was somehow wrong. They followed clues gleaned from Mandalorian intelligence archives, references to the Sith Emperor, coordinates of worlds where Mandalore's agents had made contact with this mysterious figure, fragments of information that piece by piece formed a map leading deeper into uncharted space. On several worlds, they found star maps, ancient Rakatan technology, older than the Republic itself, predating even the earliest Sith empires. These artifacts had been left by the Infinite Empire, a civilization that had once ruled vast portions of the galaxy through brutal conquest and advanced technology. Each star map revealed part of a larger puzzle. The Rakata had built something, a space station of immense power, using the stars themselves as an energy source, a facility that could produce warships infinitely, limited only by available resources and time, the Star Forge. When Revan finally located it, orbiting the planet Lahan in a system so remote that no modern civilization had ever charted it, he understood immediately what it represented. This was the answer, the tool he needed to prepare the galaxy for the Emperor's invasion. With the Star Forge, he could build a fleet that would dwarf anything the Republic currently possessed. He could create a military force powerful enough to stand against the hidden Sith Empire. But the Star Forge was not just a factory, it was a dark side nexus, feeding on the negative emotions of those who used it and amplifying them back. The Rakata had fallen because of it, their civilization consuming itself in wars fueled by the very technology that had made them powerful. The station was not just a tool, it was a trap. Revan did not see the trap, or perhaps he saw it and believed himself strong enough to avoid it. With the location of the Star Forge secured, Revan made a decision. He would confront the Sith Emperor directly, not to serve him, not to join him, but to understand him, to measure the true scope of the threat, and determine how best to counter it. The trail led to Drummond Chaos, a world wrapped in perpetual storms and steeped in dark side energy so thick it was almost tangible. This was the capital of the hidden Sith Empire, a civilization that had existed in secret for over 1,000 years, building its strength, waiting for the right moment to emerge and reclaim the galaxy it believed was rightfully theirs. The Emperor received Revan and Malak personally, not as guests, not as supplicants, but as curiosities, two Jedi who had touched the dark side and survived, who had led armies to victory, who possessed power unusual even by Sith standards. The Emperor wanted to understand them, to measure their potential, to determine whether they could be useful. What followed was not a battle. It was something far worse. Emperor Vitiate was ancient beyond comprehension. He had achieved immortality through Sith sorcery, consuming the life force of entire worlds to sustain himself. He had ruled his empire for over 1,000 years, patient and calculating, preparing for the day when he would unleash his forces on an unsuspecting republic. His power in the Force was absolute. When he focused his attention on Revan and Malak, it was like standing before a black hole, feeling reality itself warping around his presence. They fought, of course. They resisted with everything they had learned, every technique they had mastered. It was not enough, not even close. The Emperor did not kill them. Instead, he did something more insidious. He invaded their minds, peeling back every layer of their psyche, examining their thoughts, their motivations, their fears and desires. And as he explored their consciousness, he planted his own influence. Seeds of darkness that would grow slowly, corrupting their judgment, twisting their goals toward his own purposes. The torture lasted days or weeks. Time became meaningless under the Emperor's assault. When it finally ended, Revan and Malak knelt before him, broken and remade. Malak's fall was complete. He embraced the dark side utterly, becoming everything the Emperor wanted him to be, a weapon, a tool to be deployed against the Republic when the time came. But Revan was different. Some core of his being, some fundamental aspect of his identity, resisted even the Emperor's corruption. He could not break free, could not throw off the Emperor's influence, but he retained enough of himself to twist that influence toward his own purposes. The Emperor commanded them to return to the Republic, to conquer it, and prepare it for his eventual arrival, to break its will to resist, to shatter the Jedi Order, to create chaos that would make invasion easy. Revan heard those commands and interpreted them differently. Yes, he would conquer the Republic, but not to weaken it for the Emperor. He would conquer it to strengthen it, to forge it into a unified military power capable of resisting the Emperor's forces. He would use the Star Forge to build the fleet the galaxy needed. And he would do it all before the Emperor realized what was happening. It was an impossible plan. A gambit so audacious that it bordered on insanity. Revan would have to become the Dark Lord of the Sith, wage war against the Republic, and somehow emerge victorious without actually destroying the very thing he was trying to save. He would have to walk the razor's edge between serving the Emperor's commands and subverting them, all while the dark side corruption ate away at his judgment and his sanity. But he believed he could do it. The dark side whispered that he was strong enough, smart enough, special enough to accomplish what no one else could, that he alone could save the galaxy by damning it first. When the Ebon Hawk emerged from the unknown regions and returned to known space, it carried two Sith Lords, not the Jedi who had departed months before, but something new and terrible. Darth Revan, Dark Lord of the Sith, and his apprentice Darth Malak, marked by his cybernetic jaw, a permanent reminder of the Emperor's power. They brought with them the coordinates to the Starforge and a plan that would plunge the galaxy into a new war before the old one had even finished healing. 3,959 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Republic's nightmare returned wearing a different face. Ships began appearing at the edges of known space. Not Mandalorian vessels this time, but something more disturbing: Republic warships. Familiar designs, familiar markings, but flying under banners that had not been seen in generations. The banner of the Sith Empire. The first worlds to fall barely had time to send distress signals. Outer Rim colonies that had just begun rebuilding from Mandalorian occupation found themselves under new management. But this conquest was different, surgical, precise. Infrastructure remained intact. Populations were largely unharmed. The new Sith forces seemed more interested in control than destruction. When the Senate finally grasped what was happening, the shock was profound. The hero of the Mandalorian Wars had returned as their enemy. Revan, the brilliant strategist who had saved the Republic, now wore the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. And beside him stood Malak, his loyal friend and brother in arms, now bearing a cybernetic jaw and the title of Sith Apprentice. The transformation seemed incomprehensible. How does a Jedi Knight who defied the Council to save innocent lives become the very thing he fought against? The answer was more complex than simple corruption or a fall to darkness. Revan had indeed fallen, but he retained enough of his original purpose to shape that fall toward what he believed was a greater goal. He was building an empire, yes, but an empire designed to resist the true threat he had discovered in the unknown regions. Every world he conquered added to the industrial base. Every fleet he assembled became part of the force that would eventually face the Emperor's invasion. But intentions matter less than actions. And the actions of the newly declared Sith Empire were devastating to the Republic that had just survived one existential war and now faced another. The Starforge produced ships at an impossible rate. Revan had unlocked its secrets, learned to harness its power without being completely consumed by it. Warships rolled out of the ancient station's bays in numbers that defied conventional manufacturing capability. Interdictor cruisers, Sith fighters, capital ships bearing weapons that Republic vessels could not match. The early conquests followed a pattern that military analysts struggled to understand. Revan targeted specific systems with valuable shipyards, manufacturing centers, or strategic hyperspace positions. He avoided unnecessary casualties. When worlds surrendered, they were treated relatively well by occupation standards. Their industries were seized, but their populations largely left alone. This was conquest by a former Republic general who understood logistics, supply chains, and the importance of preserving what you intended to rule. It was efficient, professional, terrifying in its calculated precision. And it worked with devastating effectiveness. Korriban fell within days of the Sith fleet's emergence. The ancient Sith homeworld, abandoned for generations, became the new Empire's spiritual center. Revan wasted no time establishing a new Sith Academy in the Valley of the Dark Lords, training Dark Jedi in techniques he had learned from ancient holocrons and from his time in the unknown regions. But these were not traditional Sith. Revan's approach was pragmatic rather than ideological. He sought Force users with skill and loyalty, converting Jedi who had followed him in the Mandalorian Wars and recruiting others who saw opportunity in the New Order. The Academy became a factory for Dark Jedi, producing warriors who combined Jedi training with Sith philosophy. The conquests expanded with methodical precision. Roche, homeworld of the insectoid Verpine, and site of crucial shipyards, surrendered after minimal resistance. Revan's terms were generous. Continue producing ships, but now for the Sith fleet. In return, your people remain unharmed, and your government structure stays intact. Many worlds made similar calculations: fight and be destroyed, or surrender, and maintain some degree of autonomy. The choice seemed obvious. The Tapani sector fell, bringing with it the massive shipyards of Fondor. Suddenly, the Sith Empire possessed manufacturing capability that rivaled the Republic's remaining facilities. Core worlds like Corellia, Duro, and Belassa came under Sith control through a combination of military pressure and political maneuvering. But the Republic held, barely. Strategic victories at Comenor, Denon, and Deverin prevented complete Sith breakthrough into the core. Republic forces, learning from Revan's own tactical innovations during the Mandalorian Wars, managed to contain the Sith advance into specific regions rather than allowing unlimited expansion. The galaxy became a patchwork. Sith controlled the outer rim almost entirely and had carved deep pockets into mid-rim and even core territories. But the Republic maintained control of Coruscant and enough surrounding systems to remain viable as a government and military power. What emerged was not a quick conquest, but a grinding war of attrition. And it was in this grinding conflict that the cracks in the Sith leadership began to show. Malak had embraced the dark side completely, where Revan saw conquered worlds as assets to be preserved. Malak saw them as subjects to be dominated, where Revan calculated the minimum force necessary to achieve objectives. Malak preferred overwhelming displays of power that left no doubt about Sith supremacy. The ideological divide between master and apprentice grew wider with each campaign. Revan's approach preserved infrastructure and populations because he believed the galaxy would need them when the real war came. Malak's approach was simpler. The strong ruled the weak. Mercy was weakness. Total domination was the only acceptable outcome. Their arguments, initially private, began to surface in strategy meetings. Sith officers learned to gauge which Dark Lord would be attending before proposing plans. Revan might approve a surgical strike that minimized casualties. Malak would demand a bombardment that left no possibility of resistance. Among those caught in this divide was Admiral Saul Karath, the Republic's most decorated officer before his defection to the Sith. He had followed Revan because he believed in the man who had saved the Republic once and could do so again. The brutality that Malak represented was not what he had signed up for. But he was in too deep to turn back. His defection had been public and permanent. The Republic would execute him as a traitor if he returned, so he stayed, serving a cause he was increasingly uncertain about, watching as the Sith Empire became something other than what he had believed it would be. The Jedi Order's response to this new threat was complicated by their own internal divisions. The Council had warned against joining the Mandalorian Wars. They had predicted that Revan's path would lead to darkness, and now those predictions had come horrifyingly true. Some Jedi argued for a mea culpa, an acknowledgement that perhaps if they had handled Revan differently, had supported him rather than opposed him, he might not have fallen. Others insisted that Revan's fall proved the Council's wisdom. War corrupted, power corrupted. The Jedi who had defied the Council were now Sith, exactly as foreseen. But philosophical debates, meant nothing against Sith fleets burning Republic worlds. A young Jedi named Bastila Shan emerged as the Order's greatest hope. She possessed a rare gift, battle meditation, the ability to influence combat through the Force. When Bastila meditated during battle, Republic forces fought with enhanced coordination and morale, while enemy forces suffered confusion and doubt. Her power could turn the tide of entire fleet engagements. The Council recognized her value immediately. She was assigned to lead Jedi strike teams against high-value Sith targets. Her battle meditation coordinated Republic defenses across multiple systems. She became the symbol of Jedi resistance against the Sith threat, just as Revan had once been the symbol of Republic resistance against the Mandalorians. The irony was not lost on anyone. As the war dragged on, both sides suffered. Republic worlds burned. Sith expansion stalled. Casualties mounted into the millions. And the galaxy, which had hoped for peace after the Mandalorian wars, found itself trapped in an even more devastating conflict. This was the Jedi Civil War, a conflict that would bring the Republic to its knees, devastate the Jedi Order, and create wounds in the Force that would take generations to heal. But it had only just begun. The worst was yet to come. Between 3,958 and 3,957 years before the Battle of Yavin, the war consumed everything. The initial shock of Revan's return as a Sith Lord had faded, replaced by the grim reality of sustained conflict. This was not a war of decisive battles and quick resolutions. This was attrition, planets changing hands, trade routes becoming battlegrounds, entire star systems depopulated by fighting or blockade. Telos 4, a temperate world known for its natural beauty and thriving economy, became a symbol of the war's brutality. The planet held strategic importance, controlling access to several major hyperspace lanes. Both sides wanted it. Both sides were willing to pay any price to hold it. The siege lasted for months. Republic forces entrenched on the surface while Sith fleets blockaded from orbit. Civilian casualties mounted as supplies dwindled. Then Malak made a decision that horrified even some of his own officers. If the Republic would not surrender Talos, he would make it worthless. The orbital bombardment was systematic and thorough. Cities were reduced to rubble. Forests burned. Oceans boiled under sustained turbo-laser fire. When the bombardment ended, Telos 4's surface was uninhabitable. Billions dead or displaced, an entire world rendered lifeless. Revan reportedly raged at Malak for the decision. This was not the plan. Telos was supposed to be conquered intact, its shipyards and manufacturing facilities added to the Sith industrial base. Instead, it was a wasteland that served no purpose for either side. But the damage was done, and the message was clear. Malak was no longer simply following Revan's orders. He was making his own choices, pursuing his own vision of what the Sith Empire should be. Dantooine suffered a similar fate. The Jedi Enclave, already damaged during the Mandalorian Wars, was bombed again by Malak's forces. This time, the attack was not strategic. It was spite, revenge against the council that had once trained him. The ruins of the Enclave were pulverized. The few Jedi and civilians remaining were hunted down. The grasslands ran red. The Jedi Council had evacuated most of their important artifacts and holocrons before the attack, sensing it through the Force. But many Jedi died defending the Enclave. Many more civilians who had sought shelter there perished in the bombardment. Each atrocity drove more Jedi to the war effort. Each loss hardened Republic resolve. But hardened resolve meant little against the Starforge's unlimited production capacity. Intelligence analysts studying the conflict began to notice patterns that troubled them deeply. Revan's conquests, brutal as they were, followed strategic logic. He targeted worlds with military value. He preserved infrastructure. He converted rather than destroyed. Malak's actions lacked that coherent strategy. He destroyed for the sake of destruction. He terrorized for the sake of terror. And yet, the Sith Empire's overall strategy still bore Revan's fingerprints. The contradiction suggested internal conflict within the Sith leadership. Republic intelligence officers began piecing together fragments of information from captured Sith personnel, intercepted communications, and defectors brave or desperate enough to risk the transition. A picture emerged of an empire divided between two visions, Revan's calculated conquest versus Malak's brutal domination. The question became which vision would ultimately prevail. Manaan, the ocean world that supplied Kolto to both sides, maintained precarious neutrality. The Selkath government understood that their healing substance made them invaluable and untouchable. Both Republic and Sith needed Kolto for their medical facilities. Both honored Manaan's neutrality, though neither trusted the other to continue doing so. Secret bases operated beneath Manaan's oceans, Sith experimentation with Kolto harvesting. Republic monitoring stations watching for Sith treaty violations. The whole planet was a powder keg waiting for one side to make a move that would force the other to respond. Multiple perspectives on the conflict began to diverge dramatically. Soldiers on both sides saw only the immediate horror of combat. Commanders saw strategic objectives and tactical challenges. Politicians saw opportunities and threats to their power, and a very few, began to see the deeper pattern. Karthanasi was a Republic officer whose world had been destroyed. Tellus had been his home. His family had died in Malak's bombardment. For him, the war was personal. It was about revenge against the Sith who had taken everything from him. But it was also about something more complex. He had served under Revan during the Mandalorian Wars. He had witnessed the man's brilliance, his dedication, his genuine desire to protect innocent lives. The transformation from that hero to the Dark Lord of the Sith seemed impossible to reconcile, and yet it had happened, which meant that anyone could fall. Any hero could become a monster if circumstances pushed hard enough. That realization terrified him more than any Sith fleet. Canderous Ordo watched the conflict from the perspective of a mercenary who had fought on both sides of too many wars. He respected Revan's tactical genius. The Jedi had defeated Mandalore the Ultimate in honorable combat, earning the respect of every Mandalorian warrior. But this new war was not about honor. It was about power. Naked, brutal, unrestrained power. The Mandalorians had scattered after their defeat at Malachor V. Some became mercenaries. Some tried to return to their homeworlds and rebuild their culture. A few, like Canderous, simply watched and waited to see what would emerge from the chaos. Whether the Republic or the Sith prevailed mattered less than whether the victor would be someone Mandalorians could respect. Bastila Shan's perspective was shaped by her role as the Republic's greatest force weapon. She was 20 years old and bore responsibility for coordinating entire fleet actions through her battle meditation. The weight of that responsibility aged her beyond her years. She had never met Revan. Not the man, not the hero, only the enemy. And yet she felt drawn to him in ways she could not explain. Through the Force, she sensed something in the Dark Lord that others missed. A conflict, a war within the war. A part of him that resisted what he had become. The Jedi Masters dismissed her observations as wishful thinking. Revan was lost to the dark side. There was no redemption for someone who had fallen so far, who had caused so much suffering. The only solution was defeat, capture, or kill. But Bastila could not shake the feeling that there was more to the story than simple corruption and fall. Admiral Saul Karath commanded the Leviathan, the Sith flagship, and struggled daily with his choices. He had defected because he believed Revan when the Dark Lord spoke of preparing the galaxy for a greater threat, but that noble purpose seemed increasingly distant. The war had taken on its own momentum. conquest for conquest's sake, power for power's sake. He rationalized his continued service by focusing on the mission, following orders, doing his duty. But at night, alone in his quarters, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, if he had betrayed everything he once stood for in service to a cause that had lost its way. The space battles became legendary in their scale and ferocity, entire fleets clashing across multiple systems simultaneously, fighters dueling through debris fields, capital ships trading broadsides that lit up the darkness like artificial suns. And through it all, the Starforge continued producing ships, feeding the Sith war machine with resources that seemed infinite. Republic strategists understood they could not win a war of attrition against unlimited production. They needed to strike at the source, find the Starforge and destroy it, but its location remained one of the Sith's most closely guarded secrets. The Stealer's battle meditation became the Republic's primary advantage. Her ability to coordinate forces allowed smaller Republic fleets to defeat larger Sith armadas, but the strain was immense. Every battle she felt the deaths of thousands through the Force. Every victory came at a cost measured in lives she had helped end. She began to wonder if winning the war would require her to sacrifice her own humanity. If she would emerge from the conflict as scarred and changed as Revan had been after the Mandalorian Wars. The Jedi Council formulated a plan, desperate, dangerous, perhaps immoral, but the galaxy was running out of options. They would use Bastila's connection to the Force to track Revan, set an ambush, and either capture or kill the Dark Lord. Without Revan's strategic genius, the Sith Empire would fracture. Malak could be brutal, but he lacked his master's vision. The war could be won. All they needed was an opportunity. A moment when Revan was vulnerable, a time when his attention was divided. That opportunity was coming. Malak was tired of being the apprentice, tired of following orders he disagreed with, tired of watching his master cling to strategies that Malak considered weakness. The Sith rule of two was ancient. The apprentice eventually overthrows the master. It was the natural order. And Malak was ready to claim what he believed should be his. The stage was set. The Jedi prepared their ambush. Malak plotted his betrayal, and Revan, caught between his original purpose and the dark side corruption eating away at his sanity, moved forward with plans that made sense only to him. The war was about to reach its turning point. And nothing would ever be the same. 3,957 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Jedi Council made a choice that would haunt them for generations. They had debated for weeks the ethics of assassination, the morality of using subterfuge and ambush against an enemy who had once been their own, whether the ends justified the means. In the end, pragmatism won over principle. The galaxy was dying. Millions had already perished. Billions more would follow if the war continued. Revan had to be stopped by any means necessary. Bastila Shan received her orders in a private meeting with the Council. She would lead an elite strike team of Jedi Knights on a mission to capture or kill Darth Revan. The Council preferred capture. A live Dark Lord could provide intelligence about the Starforge's location and the full scope of Sith operations, but if capture proved impossible, elimination was authorized. Bastila felt the weight of what they were asking. She had killed Sith warriors in battle. That was warfare, but this was different. This was planned assassination of a specific target, a former Jedi who had once fought for the same causes she now fought for. Master Vrak sensed her hesitation. The Dark Lord is not the man he was. Revan died on Malachor 5. What wears his face now is something else. Do not let memories of who he was cloud your judgment about what he has become. She accepted the mission because she saw no alternative. The Force itself seemed to be guiding her toward this confrontation, toward Revan. The plan was intricate. Republic intelligence had been tracking Sith fleet movements, looking for patterns that would reveal when and where Revan's flagship would be vulnerable. They found it. A scheduled engagement in the Outer Rim where Revan would personally oversee the assault on a Republic stronghold. The Republic fleet would engage the Sith forces in what appeared to be a standard defensive action. But embedded within that fleet would be specialized ships carrying the Jedi strike team. When battle was joined, when attention was focused on the larger conflict, those ships would break formation and make a run at Revan's flagship, the Leviathan. Bastila would use her battle meditation to coordinate the assault, making it appear to Sith forces that the Republic fleet was more organized and numerous than reality. The confusion this created would provide the window the strike team needed. Everything depended on timing and Revan being exactly where intelligence predicted. The battle began as planned. Republic and Sith fleets crashed together with the familiar ferocity of a war that had ground on for too long. Ships exploded, fighters spiraled through debris fields, capital vessels traded fire across distances measured in thousands of kilometers. And Bastila reached out through the Force, touching the minds of Republic commanders across the entire engagement zone. Her battle meditation wove their actions together, creating coordination that approached telepathy. Sith commanders found themselves facing opponents who seemed to anticipate every move, who responded to threats before they fully developed. The Leviathan, massive and bristling with weapons, held position in the center of the Sith formation. Revan commanded from the bridge, his tactical genius evident in every order he gave. He was countering the Republic's coordination with adaptive strategies that kept the Sith fleet competitive despite the disadvantage Bastila's meditation created. For a moment their powers clashed directly across the gulf of space. Bastila's battle meditation pressing against Revan's tactical brilliance. Neither gave ground. The battle hung in perfect balance. That was when the strike team made their move. 3 Republic ships broke formation in perfect synchronization, their course taking them directly toward the Leviathan. Sith interceptors moved to engage, but the ships were fast and heavily shielded. They punched through the defensive screen and clamped onto the Leviathan's hull. Boarding parties poured into the Sith flagship. Jedi Knights led Republic commanders through corridors designed to repel exactly this kind of assault. They fought past Sith troopers and dark Jedi, lightsabers carving through opposition, moving with singular purpose toward the bridge. Revan felt them coming. How could he not? Their presence in the Force blazed like torches in darkness. He could have retreated, could have evacuated to one of the other ships in his fleet. Instead, he did something unexpected. He waited. When Bastila and her strike team finally reached the bridge, they found Revan standing alone. His dark Jedi guards had been dismissed. His bridge crew had evacuated. It was just him, the Dark Lord of the Sith, waiting for the Jedi who had come to kill him. Bastila ignited her lightsaber, its yellow blade humming to life. Around her, 4 other Jedi Knights did the same. Revan remained motionless, watching them through his mask. The fight that followed was brutal and one-sided. Revan's power in the Force was overwhelming. He moved through their attacks like they were moving in slow motion. Lightsabers that should have struck him found only empty air. Force pushes that should have thrown him across the room slid off invisible barriers. One by one, the Jedi Knights fell. Not dead. Revan was not killing them, but incapacitated, unconscious, or too injured to continue fighting. Within minutes, only Bastila remained standing. She was the most powerful of them, her battle meditation adding layers of tactical awareness to her combat skills. But even she was outmatched. Revan had trained with the greatest Jedi Masters of his generation, then supplemented that training with Sith teachings from ancient holocrons. His technique was flawless, his power seemingly limitless. But as they fought, Bastila felt something through the Force, something that made no sense. Revan was holding back. not trying to kill her, not even trying particularly hard to defeat her. He was studying her, analyzing her technique, and there was something else: curiosity, recognition, as if he knew her though they had never met. Their lightsabers locked, yellow and crimson blades crossed between them. They stood face to mask, so close that Bastila could see her reflection in the polished metal covering Revan's face. Then he spoke. His voice was filtered through the mask, but there was something in it that cut through the mechanical distortion, something almost human. "You fight well. Your battle meditation is impressive, but you are holding back, afraid of what you might become if you fully embrace your power." Bastila wanted to respond, wanted to argue, but in that moment of distraction, Revan disarmed her. Her lightsaber flew from her hand. She reached out through the Force to retrieve it, but Revan's power clamped down on hers, holding her immobile. He could have killed her, should have killed her. Instead, he hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, Malak made his move. The apprentice had been monitoring the battle from his own flagship. He saw the Jedi strike team board the Leviathan. He saw an opportunity that might never come again. His master was distracted, focused on the borders, vulnerable in a way he had not been before. Malak gave the order that would change everything. All ships, target the Leviathan's bridge. Full bombardment. Now. His subordinates hesitated. That would kill the Dark Lord, kill their own master. Malak's response was cold and absolute. "Those are my orders. Execute them." The Sith fleet opened fire on its own flagship. Turboluses designed to punch through heavy capital ship armor converged on a single point, the Leviathan's bridge. Explosions ripped through the command center. Bulkheads buckled, atmosphere vented into space. The flagship shuddered under fire from its own fleet. Revan, sensing the attack too late, threw up a force barrier. It saved his life, but barely. The bridge exploded around him. He felt his body breaking, systems failing, consciousness slipping away. Bastila felt it too, felt him dying through the Force, and without thinking, without understanding why, she reached out, grabbed onto his life force as it started to fade, used the Force to anchor him, to keep him from crossing over into death. A bond formed in that instant, not planned, not desired, but undeniable, their life forces intertwined. She could feel his pain, his confusion, his desperate struggle to hold on to consciousness, and he could feel her determination, her compassion, her absolute refusal to let him die, even though killing him had been her mission. The Leviathan was coming apart. Secondary explosions ripped through the ship as systems overloaded and ammunition stores detonated. The Jedi strike team, those who could still move, grabbed their unconscious or wounded comrades, and Bastila, acting on instinct more than plan, grabbed Revan's dying body and dragged it toward their shuttle. They escaped moments before the Leviathan's bridge section tore completely away from the rest of the ship. Malak, watching from his flagship, saw the explosion and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Dark Lord was dead. The apprentice had become the master. The Sith Empire was his to command. He declared himself Dark Lord of the Sith and ordered the fleet to break off engagement. The Republic forces, confused by the sudden Sith withdrawal, but relieved nonetheless, did not pursue. They had their own wounded to recover and their own damaged ships to repair. On the Republic medical frigate, Bastila stood over Revan's broken body while healers worked frantically to stabilize him. His injuries were catastrophic. Massive trauma from the bombardment, burns, broken bones, internal damage that should have been fatal. But he was alive, barely clinging to life through the force bond Bastila had created, whether she meant to or not. The Jedi Council convened in emergency session when they learned what had happened. They had their target. Revan was captured, unconscious, and completely at their mercy. The question was what to do with him. Some masters argued for execution. He was too dangerous to keep alive. Even powerless and broken, he represented a threat. Others argued for imprisonment, lock him away somewhere secure, and use the connection Bastila had formed to extract intelligence about the Starforge and Sith operations. But Master Vandar proposed something else, something that made the other masters deeply uncomfortable. Revan's mind was shattered. The combination of physical trauma and the severing of his connection to his own fleet had left him in a coma, possibly permanent. His identity, everything that made him who he was, teetered on the edge of dissolution. What if, Vandar suggested, they did not try to repair his mind? What if they rebuilt it instead, gave him a new identity, false memories, a completely different personality? They could make him into a weapon against the Sith, use his knowledge and his connection to the Force, but strip away everything that made him dangerous. The debate that followed tested the very foundation of Jedi ethics. Was this healing or violation, redemption or murder? If they erased someone's identity and replaced it with something else, did that person still exist, or had they essentially killed him and worn his body like a suit? Master Vrock argued passionately against it. This is exactly the kind of moral compromise that the dark side uses to corrupt us. We become what we fight. But Master Vandar's response was pragmatic. The galaxy is dying. Millions are dead. Billions more will follow. We have an opportunity to end this war. The cost is one man's identity. Is that too high a price? They put it to a vote. The decision was not unanimous, but it was decisive. They would do it. They would take the broken mind of Darth Revan and rebuild it into something else. Someone else. A Republic soldier with just enough of his former self remaining to be useful, but not enough to be dangerous. Bastila was assigned to oversee the project. She would use the Force bond to help anchor the new personality, to guide the reconstruction of his psyche. It was a task that would require months of constant Force contact, of being intimately connected to the mind of the man she had been sent to kill. She accepted the assignment because refusing meant Revan would be executed, and she had already saved his life once. She could not stand by and watch him die. Now, the work began. Day by day, Jedi Masters carefully dismantled what remained of Revan's memories and replaced them with constructs. They gave him a name, gave him a history, made him believe he was someone he had never been. And when they were finished, when the person called Revan woke up, he had no memory of being a Jedi, no memory of the Mandalorian Wars, no memory of being the Dark Lord of the Sith. He remembered only what they had planted, a simple life, service to the Republic, and a strange connection to a Jedi named Bastila that he could not explain. The Jedi Council had created a weapon. Now they just needed to deploy it against the Sith Empire that its former identity had built. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Darth Malak solidified his control over the Sith forces. His first act as Dark Lord was to purge anyone he suspected of loyalty to Revan. His second was to change the strategy entirely. No more calculated conquest. No more preservation of infrastructure. Malak would rule through fear and absolute power. The strong dominated the weak. Mercy was weakness, and anyone who questioned his authority would be destroyed. The Jedi Civil War had entered its most brutal phase, and the man who might have been able to stop it was now someone else entirely, with no memory of who he had been or what he had done. The galaxy would pay the price for that transformation in ways no one could yet imagine. The galaxy learned quickly that Darth Malak was not Revan. Where the former Dark Lord had been calculating and strategic, Malak was brutal and direct. Where Revan had preserved infrastructure and populations, Malak saw only targets to be dominated or destroyed. The Sith Empire transformed overnight from a calculated conquest into a reign of terror that made the Mandalorian Wars look merciful by comparison. Malak's first act as Dark Lord sent shockwaves across the galaxy. He ordered the complete destruction of Taris, not a siege, not an occupation, total annihilation. Taris was an ecumenopolis, a world covered entirely in city layers stretching from gleaming upper platforms where the wealthy lived down through progressively darker and poorer levels until reaching the Undercity where the destitute struggled in perpetual twilight. Billions called Taris home. It was not a military target. It held no strategic value, but Bastila had escaped from Taris after a brief presence there, and that was enough for Malak. The bombardment lasted for hours. Turbo lasers reduced skyscrapers to molten slag. Entire city platforms collapsed, falling through level after level, crushing everything beneath. Firestorms swept through what the bombardment had not destroyed directly. And when it was over, Taris was a graveyard, billions dead, an entire civilization erased because one Jedi had managed to escape. "Let this be a lesson," Malak announced to the Sith fleet. "Mercy is weakness. The weak exist only to serve the strong or be destroyed by them. Any world that harbors Jedi, any system that resists Sith authority, will share Taris's fate." The psychological impact was immediate. Worlds that might have resisted surrendered without a fight. Populations that might have hidden Jedi turned them over to Sith authorities rather than risk annihilation. Fear became Malak's most effective weapon, and he wielded it without restraint. But terror alone does not build empires. Malak understood this on some level. Even if he lacked Revan's strategic sophistication, he needed more than fear. He needed power. Real power. The kind that made resistance not just inadvisable but impossible. The Starforge provided unlimited ships, but Malak discovered it offered something more. The ancient station was not just a factory, it was a nexus of dark side energy, built by the Rakata to amplify force power in those who used it. The more you drew on the Starforge, the stronger you became. But that strength came at a price. The station fed on negative emotions, anger, hatred, fear. It amplified these feelings and reflected them back, creating a feedback loop that made users progressively more unstable and more powerful simultaneously. The Rakata had fallen because of it, their civilization tearing itself apart in civil wars fueled by the very technology that had made them dominant. Malak did not care about ancient warnings or historical precedent. He cared only about power, and the Starforge offered power beyond measure. He began spending more and more time on the station, meditating in its heart, drawing on its dark energies. His already formidable force abilities grew to terrifying levels. He could crush enemies with a thought, sense threats across star systems, project his will onto those around him with overwhelming force. But the corruption was obvious to anyone who served near him. His paranoia intensified. He saw betrayal everywhere, conspiracies in every shadow. Officers who had served loyally for years found themselves executed on suspicion of disloyalty. Dark Jedi who questioned his orders were killed as examples. The Sith command structure became a nightmare of fear, where survival depended not on competence, but on absolute, unquestioning obedience. Admiral Saul Karath walked this razor's edge daily. He commanded the Sith fleet, coordinated military operations, and served as the public face of Sith military authority. But he lived in constant fear that Malak would sense doubt, would perceive hesitation, would execute him as casually as he had executed dozens of others. Karath had defected because he believed in Revan's vision, a strong, unified galaxy prepared to face the greater threat lurking in the unknown regions. That vision had died with Revan. What remained was a paranoid tyrant who destroyed for destruction's sake and called it strength. But where could Karath go? The Republic would never take him back. He had bombed Republic worlds, killed Republic soldiers, betrayed everything he had once stood for. His only choice was to continue serving and hope he remained useful enough to avoid Malak's purges. The Jedi hunting intensified under Malak's rule. Revan had targeted Jedi as military threats, to be defeated in combat or converted to the Sith cause. Malak saw them as resources to be exploited. Captured Jedi were no longer offered the choice of conversion. They were taken to the Starforge and imprisoned in stasis fields, their life force slowly drained to fuel Malak's growing power. The Dark Lord had discovered that he could feed on other Force users, absorbing their energy and adding it to his own. It was an ancient Sith technique, forbidden even by most Sith because of its corrupting influence. Dozens of Jedi hung suspended in the Starforge's depths, trapped in a twilight state between life and death, their power siphoned away to make Malak stronger. He would meditate before them, drawing on their life force, feeling his power grow with each Jedi he consumed. The practice was horrifying even by Sith standards. Some of Malak's own Dark Jedi expressed discomfort with it. That discomfort was noted. Those who voiced it too loudly joined the Jedi in the stasis fields. Dantooine, already scarred from previous attacks, received Malak's attention again. The Jedi Enclave's ruins were bombed yet again, this time reduced to atomic dust. The few settlers and farmers who had remained, hoping to rebuild, were systematically hunted down. Malak wanted no trace of Jedi presence to remain, no stone left standing that might remind anyone the Jedi Order had once trained students on those peaceful grasslands. The destruction served no strategic purpose. The Enclave had already been neutralized during the Mandalorian Wars and again early in the Jedi Civil War. This was pure vindictiveness, revenge against the institution that had once trained him and then watched him fall. Republic forces decimated by years of warfare and now facing an enemy who no longer followed any rules of engagement began to crumble. World after world fell not through military defeat, but through surrender born of sheer terror. Why fight when resistance meant annihilation? Why protect Jedi when doing so condemned your entire planet? The Jedi Order itself was reduced to scattered survivors. The Council had evacuated Coruscant, their temple too vulnerable to Sith attack. They operated from hidden bases, constantly moving, never staying anywhere long enough for Malak's hunters to find them. Estimates suggested fewer than 100 Jedi remained alive and free in the entire galaxy. Bastila Shan continued coordinating Republic defense through her battle meditation, but even she was struggling. The weight of constant combat, the feeling of thousands dying in battles she influenced, the knowledge that the Jedi Order was dying, all of it pressed down on her with crushing force. And beneath it all, she felt something else through the Force bond she had created. Revan, the man with no memory of who he had been. The Republic had assigned him to her protection, told him he was a soldier recovering from injuries. He served the Republic faithfully, having no idea he had once nearly destroyed it. Sometimes, when she meditated, she could feel fragments of his true self struggling against the false memories. The tactical genius that had won the Mandalorian Wars trying to surface, the Force power that had made him one of the most formidable beings in the galaxy, pressing against the mental barriers the Council had constructed. She wondered how long those barriers would hold, and what would happen when they inevitably failed. The Republic was losing, slowly but inexorably. The Sith Empire controlled vast swaths of territory. The Starforge produced ships faster than Republic forces could destroy them, and Malak, growing more powerful and more unstable with each passing day, seemed unstoppable. The Jedi Council understood they had one chance remaining, one desperate gambit that violated everything the Jedi stood for, but might be the only way to save the galaxy. They would use Revan, the man himself, not knowing who he was or what he had been. They would send him to find the star maps, ancient Rakatan artifacts that would lead to the Star Forge's location, because Revan had found them once before, and perhaps buried beneath the false memories and constructed identity some part of him remembered. Bastila would guide him, protect him, use the Force bond to steer him toward the objective without revealing the full truth. And when they finally located the Star Forge, the Republic would destroy it, and Malak along with it. It was manipulation, deception, using a person as a weapon without their knowledge or consent, everything the Jedi claimed to stand against. But the alternative was watching the galaxy burn under Malak's reign of terror. The mission began in secrecy. Revan, believing himself to be simply a promising Republic soldier, was assigned to Bastila's team. They would hunt for ancient Rakatan technology. No one told him why. No one mentioned that he had found these same artifacts years before as the Dark Lord of the Sith. And deep in the Star Forge, Malak continued his meditations, drawing power from captured Jedi, building his strength for the final confrontation he knew was coming. He could feel something stirring in the Force, a presence that was familiar yet wrong, like an echo of his former master, but fundamentally different. He did not yet know what the Jedi had done, did not know that Revan still lived, transformed into someone new, but he sensed something, a threat emerging from an unexpected direction, and Malak prepared to meet it with all the power he had accumulated, no matter how many Jedi he had to consume to ensure victory. 3,956 years before the Battle of Yavin, a man who did not know himself began a journey that would determine the fate of the galaxy. He believed his name was Revan, a common enough name in Republic space. He believed he had been injured during a Sith attack and spent months recovering under Jedi care. He believed he was a soldier, loyal to the Republic, ready to serve in whatever capacity his recovered abilities allowed. None of these beliefs were true, but he had no way of knowing that. Bastila Shan served as his handler and guide, though he understood her role as simply another Jedi working with Republic military forces. What he could not explain was the connection he felt to her, a bond that went deeper than professional respect or military camaraderie. When she was near, he felt more centered, more capable. When she was absent, part of him felt incomplete. She told him it was a Force bond, a connection that sometimes formed between Jedi and those they had saved. That was technically true. What she did not tell him was that she had saved him from death while he was the Dark Lord of the Sith, and that bond now served as the leash by which the Jedi Council controlled their unwitting weapon. The mission parameters were straightforward on the surface. Locate ancient Rakatan star maps scattered across various worlds. These artifacts would reveal the location of something called the Star Forge, the source of the Sith fleet's seemingly unlimited ships. Find it, destroy it, cripple the Sith war effort. Their first destination was Dantooine. The world was a graveyard, its enclave ruins standing as testament to multiple bombardments. But beneath those ruins, in caverns the Jedi had kept secret, a star map waited. Revan approached the ancient technology with an ease that surprised even Bastila. The Rakatan interface, which should have required extensive study to understand, responded to him immediately. His fingers moved across controls that had not been activated in millennia, and the star map sprang to life, projecting a fragment of galactic coordinates. One piece of a larger puzzle. 4 more star maps waited to be found. As they departed Dantooine, Revan experienced his first flash of memory. Not clear, not complete, but something, a sense that he had been here before, that these ruins had meant something to him. Once, the feeling faded as quickly as it came, leaving only confusion. Bastila felt it through their bond. The barriers the Council had constructed beginning to crack. She reinforced them with her own Force power, pushing the memory back down, maintaining the constructed identity. But she knew this was only temporary. The truth would emerge eventually. The question was whether they could complete the mission before that happened. Their companions accumulated as the journey progressed. Each brought skills and perspectives that Revan's tactical mind recognized as valuable, even if he could not fully articulate why he saw these patterns so clearly. Carth Onasi, a Republic officer whose world had burned under Malak's bombardment, joined them on Taris moments before that planet met the same fate. Carth was bitter, angry, suspicious of everyone, and especially suspicious of Jedi who made promises they could not keep. But he was also loyal and skilled, a pilot and soldier who had survived years of warfare through competence and caution. Carth looked at Revan with distrust that went beyond normal military skepticism. Something about the younger man troubled him. The way he moved, the way he assessed tactical situations. It reminded Carth of someone he had served under during the Mandalorian Wars, someone who had been brilliant and inspiring before becoming a monster. But that was impossible. Revan was dead, killed by Malak's betrayal. This was just a soldier, nothing more. Mission Vio Zalbar joined them as well, a young Twi'lek and her Wookiee companion, bound by life debt and surviving on the streets of Taris's lower levels. They had no loyalty to the Republic or the Jedi cause, but they recognized that Malak's destruction of Taris meant their home was gone. Revenge and survival made strange bedfellows with righteous purpose. On Kashyyyk, among the Wookiees' homeworld's towering forests, they found another star map and another companion, Jolee Bindo, an old man who claimed to be a Jedi but lived as a hermit in the Shadowlands. He was cynical and irreverent, mocking the Jedi Order's rigid dogma while demonstrating Force abilities that proved his credentials. Jolee looked at Revan and saw something that made the old Jedi's eyes narrow. Power, yes, but also fragmentation, like someone was not quite whole. He said nothing, but he watched carefully. Tatooine's desert wastes hid a star map in a cave inhabited by a crate dragon. The recovery mission nearly cost them their lives, but Revan's tactical thinking saved them. He analyzed the creature's attack patterns, identified vulnerabilities, coordinated the team's efforts with precision that seemed almost supernatural. The Stealer watched him work and felt dread building. These were not the skills of a soldier recovering from injury. This was something else. The mask of false identity was slipping, and what lay beneath was beginning to show through. On Nanan, beneath the waves of the ocean world, they found the fourth star map, but they also found Sith experiments with Kolto harvesting that threatened to poison the world's ecosystem. Revan made a choice that surprised everyone. He destroyed the Sith facility, even though it meant losing the Selkath government's goodwill. Some things, he said, were more important than political advantage. Carth recognized the reasoning. It was something the old Revan might have said, the hero from the Mandalorian Wars, before the fall. The final star map waited on Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld, Malak's primary training ground for dark Jedi. Walking into the heart of enemy territory was suicide, but it was also necessary. They posed as Sith, initiates playing roles to infiltrate the academy, and on Korriban, surrounded by dark side energy and Sith teachings, Revan began to remember. Not everything, not clearly, but fragments, flashes of standing in these same halls, wearing different clothes, different armor. A mask that covered his face, the taste of power and purpose that had driven him to do terrible things for what he believed were right reasons. The tombs beneath Korriban's surface held ancient Sith lords, their spirits lingering as dark side echoes. When Revan entered those tombs, they recognized him. The dark side recognized him. "Welcome back," one whispered. "We have been waiting for you. You cannot hide from what you are, cannot escape who you were. The Dark Lord returns." Revan fled the tombs, shaken and confused. The Stealer tried to calm him, to reinforce the false memories, but the cracks were spreading too wide. The truth was rising like a flood, and no mental barriers could hold it back forever. They assembled all 5 star maps and triangulated the coordinates. The Star Forge orbited Letheon, a world in unknown space far from any charted system. With the location revealed, they returned to the Republic fleet to report their findings and prepare for the final assault. But before that assault could launch, they had to travel to Letheon itself, to confirm the coordinates, to understand what they were facing, to gather intelligence that would make the Republic attack possible. On Letheon's surface, among the ruins of the ancient Rakatan civilization, Revan found something the Jedi Council had not anticipated. The Elder Rakata, descendants of the species that had built the Star Forge, living in tribal conditions, their technology lost, their empire dust. And these elders knew the truth. They recognized Revan not as a Republic soldier, but as the Dark Lord who had come years before, who had conquered the Star Forge, who had used their own technology against them. The Elder spoke the words that shattered Revan's world. "You are not what you believe yourself to be. You are Revan, the Jedi who defied the Council and won the Mandalorian Wars, the Dark Lord who conquered half the galaxy, the one betrayed by his apprentice and remade by the Jedi into a weapon against your own empire." Everything collapsed. The false memories, the constructed identity, all of it crumbling as true memories flooded back in overwhelming torrents. He remembered everything. The Mandalorian Wars, the victories and the atrocities, Malika 5 and the mass shadow generator, the journey into unknown regions, the Emperor's torture and corruption, building the Sith Empire, the Star Forge, the war against the Republic, Malika's betrayal, and he remembered standing on the bridge of the Leviathan facing a young Jedi Knight named Bastila, feeling something through the Force that made him hesitate when he should have killed her. The Council had not just captured him, they had erased him, murdered his identity, and worn his body like a puppet. And Bastila, the woman he felt bonded to, the one he trusted, had been part of it from the beginning. Everything was a lie. His memories, his identity, his purpose. His companions, seeing his face as the truth crashed over him, did not understand what was happening. But Bastila did. She felt it through their bond, felt the barriers shattering, felt the real Revan emerging from beneath the false persona. She tried to explain, tried to justify what the Council had done. "You were dying. We saved you, gave you a new chance, a chance to redeem yourself." Revan's response was cold. "You murdered who I was and called it salvation. You made me a weapon and pretended it was mercy. How many people have the Jedi killed and told themselves it was justice?" Karth stepped between them, hand on his weapon, suspicion finally confirmed. "You destroyed my world, killed my family, led the Sith against everything I fought to protect." And Revan could not deny it, because it was true. All of it was true. The monster Karth had lost everything fighting against, was standing right in front of him, wearing the mask of an ally. The confrontation could have ended in violence, should have ended that way. But Jolie interrupted with a question that cut through the anger and confusion. "So what are you going to do now? You know what you were. You can feel the dark side calling you back to it. But you also know what you've become, what you've done in these past months as someone else. Which person are you? The Dark Lord or the soldier? The destroyer or the protector?" Revan stood at a crossroads. He could reclaim his power, return to the dark side, take back what Malak had stolen. The path was clear, and the pull was strong. Part of him, the part that had touched the darkness on Malika 5, and in the Emperor's throne room, wanted exactly that. But another part remembered. Remembered fighting alongside these companions. Remembered making choices that prioritized protecting innocence over strategic advantage. remembered most painfully the Jedi who had stood on Dantooine all those years ago and defied the Council because he believed saving lives was more important than following orders. That Jedi had fallen into darkness trying to save the galaxy, and the darkness had convinced him that conquest was salvation, that tyranny was protection, that the ends justified any means. He had been wrong. The realization hit with crushing force. He had become exactly what he fought against, had justified atrocity by wrapping it in noble purpose, had destroyed everything he meant to protect in the name of saving it. The dark side whispered that this was weakness, that redemption was a fantasy, that power was all that mattered, that he should embrace what he was and reclaim his throne. Revan made his choice. He rejected the whispers, chose the light over the darkness, chose to be the person he had become rather than return to the monster he had been. I was Revan. I fell to darkness and nearly destroyed the galaxy in the name of saving it. But I am not that person anymore. I choose to be better than what I was. I choose to earn redemption rather than claim power. Bastila felt the shift through their bond, relief and hope mixing with fear. This could still go wrong. The pull of the dark side never truly released you. But for now, in this moment, Revan had chosen the light. Koth was not convinced. Words were easy. Actions would prove whether this transformation was genuine or just another manipulation. But before debates could continue, the situation escalated. Malak had felt Revan's presence the moment his memories returned. The darkness recognized the darkness, even when trying to hide. The Dark Lord dispatched a fleet to Lahan, with orders to capture or kill everyone involved. The battle for the Star Forge was about to begin, and at its center stood a man torn between two identities, trying desperately to prove that redemption was possible even for those who had fallen as far as he had fallen. Malak, waiting on the Star Forge with captured Jedi fueling his power, prepared for the confrontation he had been anticipating. His master had returned, and only one of them would survive what came next. The Republic fleet assembled above Lahan in the largest concentration of military force it had mustered since the war began. Every ship that could be spared, every fighter that could launch, every soldier who could stand. This was it, the final confrontation. Win here, and the war ended. Lose, and the Republic fell. Admiral Fawn Dodonna commanded from the bridge of the Republic flagship, coordinating fleet movements with the precision of someone who had survived years of brutal warfare through competence rather than luck. But even she understood the mathematics. The Sith had more ships, better ships. Ships produced by the Starforge faster than they could be destroyed. The only advantage the Republic possessed was Bastila's battle meditation, and even that was uncertain now, with the revelation of Revan's identity creating fractures in the trust that made their bond effective. The space battle began with the savage intensity of combatants who knew this was the end. One way or another, turbo lasers lit the darkness, fighters spiraled through debris fields, capital ships traded broadsides that would have shattered smaller vessels, and Bastila reached out through the Force, touching the minds of Republic commanders, weaving their actions together into coordinated defense. But something was wrong. Her battle meditation, normally a beacon of light and coordination, felt twisted, corrupted. Malak had captured her. The timeline had shifted. In the chaos of Lahan's surface, Sith forces had ambushed their team. Revan and the others fought desperately, but Dark Jedi overwhelmed them through sheer numbers. Bastila, trying to hold the line, was isolated and captured. Malak took her to the Star Forge personally. He had plans for her. Her battle meditation made her too valuable to simply kill, and she was strong in the Force, strong enough to be useful once properly broken. The torture was methodical, physical pain combined with psychological assault. Malak showed her visions through the Force, worlds burning, the Republic fleet being systematically destroyed, her companions dying one by one. All of it her fault because she was not strong enough to resist, not powerful enough to fight back. And beneath the torture lay a simpler message. The dark side offered power, real power, the kind that meant never being helpless again, never being victim, always being the one in control. The Stealer resisted as long as she could, hours that felt like days, days that might have been weeks. Time lost meaning in the Starforge's dark embrace. But gradually, inevitably, her defenses crumbled. She fell, not all at once, but piece by piece. Each choice to embrace anger over peace. Each moment when hatred felt better than helplessness. Until finally the light within her gutted out, replaced by darkness that promised strength. When Malak released her from the torture chamber, she was his, mind, body, and force power. And her battle meditation, once the Republic's greatest weapon, now served the Sith. Every Republic commander felt it. The coordination they had relied on becoming confusion, their tactical advantages turning into vulnerabilities. The Republic fleet began to crumble under the assault. Revan felt Bastila's fall through their bond like a physical blow. The woman who had saved him, guided him, connected him to himself, despite the lies and manipulation, had been consumed by the very darkness he was fighting to escape. And it was his fault. If he had been stronger, faster, more aware, he could have prevented her capture. But guilt accomplished nothing. Action was required. He gathered his companions. Karth, still suspicious but committed. Mission and Zalbar, loyal despite everything. Julie, cynical but present. Huhani, a Katha Jedi who had joined them on Dantooly, seeking redemption for her own near fall to darkness. And Canderous Ordu, the Mandalorian warrior who had fought against Revan years ago and now fought beside him because warriors respected strength wherever it appeared. Their mission was clear. Infiltrate the Starforge. Disable Bastila's corrupted battle meditation. Stop Malak. Destroy the station. Simple objectives. Nearly impossible execution. They stole a Sith ship, using codes. Revan remembered from his time as Dark Lord. The irony was not lost on him, his past sins providing the tools for present redemption. They docked with the Starforge and fought their way inside. The station's interior was a nightmare of dark side architecture. Walls pulsed with energy drawn from the stars themselves. Captured Jedi hung in stasis, their life force being drained to fuel Malak's power. Sith troopers and dark Jedi patrolled corridors designed to disorient and terrify. But Revan knew these halls, had walked them before. His memories, both as Dark Lord and through the Force, guided them through defenses that should have been impenetrable. They fought through waves of defenders. Lightsabers carved through Sith troopers. Blasters took down dark Jedi, caught off guard. Canderous's heavy weapons cleared corridors. Zalbar's strength broke through barricades. They advanced meter by meter toward the station's heart. And then they found Bastila. She stood in a meditation chamber, her lightsaber burning crimson now instead of yellow. Her presence in the Force was wrong, twisted, radiating darkness that made even approaching her painful. When she saw Revan, her expression was contempt mixed with something more complex: desire, anger, recognition. "You could be strong again," she said. "Take back what Malak stole. Together we could rule this empire. Finish what you started. Prepare the galaxy for the Emperor's invasion by conquering it first. It was always the right plan. You just lost your way." Revan wanted to reach her, to pull her back from the darkness, the way she had pulled him from death. But he understood something she did not. You cannot save someone from darkness by joining them in it. You save them by showing that the light is stronger. Their duel was heartbreaking, not because of its ferocity, though they fought with desperate intensity, but because of what it represented. Two people bound together, who had saved each other in different ways, now trying to destroy one another. Each strike of their lightsabers was both attack and plea. Each force push was argument and counter-argument about what strength truly meant. Revan fought defensively, not trying to kill her but to exhaust her, to break through the darkness, not with overwhelming power, but with persistent compassion. Every time she struck, he blocked and retreated. Every time she unleashed force lightning, he absorbed it and held his ground. "I know the darkness," he told her. "I lived in it for years. It promises strength but delivers only emptiness. It offers power but costs everything that makes power worth having. Come back. Choose light over easy strength. It's harder, but it's real." Something in his words, or perhaps in their bond, cut through the darkness. Bastila hesitated, felt the truth in what he said because she could sense his sincerity through their connection. The darkness had lied, promised control but delivered only slavery to Malak, offered power but made her weak. She fell to her knees, the darkness releasing its hold, not because it wanted to, but because she chose to push it away. Redemption was possible, even for those who had fallen far, even for her. Revan helped her up, and together they turned toward the real enemy. Malak waited for them in the Starforger's throne room, surrounded by the suspended bodies of captured Jedi. His power was immense, amplified by the station and the life force he had drained from dozens of prisoners. The confrontation between master and apprentice had been inevitable from the moment Malak fired on the Leviathan's bridge. Now it would end, one way or another. Malak's opening attack was overwhelming. Force lightning that could shatter shields, telekinetic throws that sent Revan flying across the chamber, lightsaber techniques that combined raw power with surprising finesse. The Dark Lord had grown stronger, more dangerous, more consumed by darkness. But he had also grown more dependent. Whenever Revan gained advantage, Malak would retreat to the suspended Jedi and drain their life force, healing his wounds, restoring his power. It was a grotesque display, the ultimate perversion of the Force, using others' lives as fuel for personal power. Revan understood that Malak could not be defeated while those Jedi remained trapped. So between dodging attacks and defending himself, he methodically freed the prisoners, one by one, breaking stasis fields, releasing Jedi who collapsed to the floor weak but alive. Each freed Jedi was one less source of power for Malak. Each broken stasis field was another step toward victory. Malak realized too late what was happening. By the time he tried to stop it, most of the Jedi were free. His power, which had seemed infinite, suddenly had limits, and Revan, fighting with purpose and determination rather than anger and hatred, was his equal. Their final duel was exhausting. Both combatants pushed to their absolute limits. Lightsabers clashed with desperate intensity. Force powers countered. Force powers. It was everything both had learned. Every technique mastered, every ounce of strength remaining, poured into one last confrontation. When Malak fell, brought down by a strike that burned through his defenses, he looked up at Revan with an expression that mixed hatred, respect, and something like relief. His last words were quiet, almost peaceful. "I always knew you were stronger, stronger than me, stronger than the dark side. I could never do what you're doing now, could never choose redemption over power. You were always the better master. I just never wanted to admit it." And then he was gone. The apprentice who had betrayed his master. The Dark Lord who had nearly destroyed the galaxy. Dead at the feet of the man he had tried to replace. Revan stood over Malak's body and felt no triumph, only exhaustion, sadness, and the heavy weight of knowing how close he had come to being exactly what Malak had become. The Starforge had to be destroyed. The temptation it represented was too great. Already he could feel it calling, offering power, promising that with it he could accomplish anything. But he knew that path, now, knew where it led, knew that some power was too dangerous to wield regardless of intent. The Republic fleet, with Bastila's purified battle meditation coordinating them again, bombarded the station from orbit. Internal sabotage that Revan's team had planted during their infiltration accelerated the destruction. The ancient Rakatan technology, which had survived millennia, finally broke apart under the combined assault. They escaped moments before the station's core, overloaded, watched from their ship as the Starforge collapsed in on itself, its dark energies dissipating, its threat ended. The Sith fleet, seeing their source of unlimited ships destroyed and their Dark Lord dead, began to surrender or flee. Some would fight on, fragments attempting to hold what they had claimed, but without central leadership and without the Starforge's production, they were manageable. The war was effectively over. Revan had saved the galaxy. Again, but this time, redemption felt more fragile than victory. He had proven that someone who had fallen as far as he had could still choose light over darkness. But he had also learned how thin the line between hero and monster could be, how easy it was to believe that terrible actions served noble purposes, how the dark side whispered justifications that sounded rational until you were too deep to see the truth. The galaxy was saved, but the cost had been almost everything, and Revan understood that his work was not finished. The Emperor still waited in unknown regions. The threat that had orchestrated the Mandalorian wars still existed, still prepared, still planned, and eventually someone would have to face it. But that was a problem for another day. For now, there was peace, fragile and hard-won, and that would have to be enough. 1 year after the destruction of the Starforge, the galaxy took its first genuine breath of peace in nearly 2 decades. The rebuilding was slow. Cities that had been bombed needed reconstruction. Economies shattered by years of warfare needed time to recover. Populations displaced by conflict needed homes. The scars would take generations to heal, but at least the bleeding had stopped. Coruscant's Senate chambers filled again with representatives from worlds that had survived. Debates resumed about taxation and trade routes and all the mundane concerns that seemed trivial during war, but formed the foundation of civilization. The Republic endured, weakened, certainly, changed fundamentally by what it had survived, but still standing. The Jedi Order faced its own reckoning. Fewer than 100 Jedi remained alive in the entire galaxy, an order that had numbered in the thousands reduced to a remnant. The Council restructured, acknowledging that their rigid adherence to dogma had contributed to the catastrophe. If they had supported Revan during the Mandalorian Wars instead of forbidding intervention, perhaps his fall could have been prevented. Or perhaps it would have happened anyway. Some questions had no answers. Master Vrook, who had opposed Revan most vocally, admitted that absolute certainty was a form of arrogance. We thought we knew the future, because we could glimpse fragments of it through the Force, but we forgot that the future is not fixed, that our choices shape it, that sometimes the path we forbid becomes the path we create by forbidding it. The surviving Jedi committed to a new philosophy: flexibility over rigidity, compassion over detachment, trust in individual Jedi to make difficult choices rather than demanding absolute obedience to Council wisdom. The Order would be smaller now, but perhaps it would be wiser. Bastila Shan remained with the Order, though her relationship with the Council was complex. She had fallen to darkness and returned to light. That experience gave her insights that masters who had never faced such temptation could not possess. She began training a new generation of Jedi, teaching them not just to avoid darkness, but to understand it, to recognize its whispers and reject them consciously, rather than pretending the temptation did not exist. Through her, the lessons of the war would pass to those who came after. That falling did not mean you were lost forever. That redemption was always possible, but never easy. That strength came not from never failing, but from rising again after failure. Carth Onasi accepted a promotion to admiral and took command of the Republic fleet's reconstruction efforts. His home world of Tellus remained a devastated wasteland, but Chancellor Cressa approved a massive restoration project. Using Ithorian ecological techniques, they began the slow process of healing the planet's scorched surface. It would take decades. Carth would likely not live to see Tellus fully restored. But the work mattered. Healing mattered. Even when it took longer than one lifetime. He made peace with Revan in his own way. Not through forgiveness. Exactly. The wound was too deep for that. But through understanding, recognizing that the man who had destroyed his world was not the same person who had fought beside him to save the galaxy. That people could change. That monsters could become heroes if they chose that path and walked it despite the cost. Canderous Ordo returned to Mandalorian space, carrying Mandalore's mask, the symbol of leadership, the right to unite the clans. He claimed the title of Mandalore the Preserver, and began rebuilding Mandalorian culture on foundations of honor rather than conquest. The Mandalorians had been used, manipulated into a war that served purposes not their own. That would not happen again. Under Canderous's leadership, the Mandalorians became something different, still warriors, still proud, but focused on protecting rather than conquering, on building rather than destroying. They would never be numerous again. Too many had died in the wars. But those who remained would remember the lessons written in blood across 2 decades of conflict. Mission and Zalorba returned to the ruins of Taris. The world was dead, but some survivors had escaped before the bombardment. Small communities struggled to exist among the wreckage. The Twirk and the Wookiee dedicated themselves to helping these survivors, building something from nothing, proving that life persisted even in the face of overwhelming destruction. Jolly Bindo returned to his hermitage, satisfied that the galaxy would survive without his intervention. He had seen empires rise and fall, watched heroes become villains, and villains become heroes. The cycle continued. It always continued, but each turn of the wheel brought new possibilities, new chances for people to choose better than those who came before. And Revan stood at the edge of everything, looking toward the unknown regions where the real threat still waited. He had married Bastila in a quiet ceremony, attended by few. Their bond through the Force had become something more, love that transcended manipulation and lies and darkness. They had saved each other in different ways, had pulled each other back from abysses that should have consumed them. That bond was real. Perhaps the only completely true thing in Revan's complicated existence. Bastila was pregnant, carrying their child. A future neither of them had imagined during the war, life emerging from all that death. But Revan could not rest. The knowledge he had gained in the unknown regions haunted him. The Sith Emperor Vitiasi was real, ancient, powerful beyond measure, and patient. He had waited over 1,000 years already. He would wait longer, building his strength, preparing his invasion. And when he finally struck, the Republic would not be ready. Someone had to stop him. Someone had to venture into that darkness and end the threat before it could emerge. Revan understood. It had to be him. He had touched that darkness and survived, had been corrupted by it, and found his way back. He knew the Emperor's power, knew how the ancient Sith thought, knew what strategies might work, where conventional approaches would fail. But he also knew he had to go alone. The darkness in the unknown regions would consume anyone who accompanied him. Bastila most of all. Their bond made her vulnerable to anything that affected him. If he fell again, she would fall with him. He could not risk that. Could not risk their child growing up without either parent. The conversation was painful. Bastila, argued, begged him not to go, reminded him that he had saved the galaxy twice already, that he had earned rest, that someone else could face this threat. But they both knew no one else could. No one else had the knowledge. No one else had survived the Emperor's corruption once. If there was any chance of stopping Vithiate before his invasion began, Revan was that chance. He left on the Ebon Hawk with only T-3MO4 for company, the loyal astromech droid who had served him through everything, who knew his secrets and kept them, who would witness what came next, whatever that might be. Bastila stood on a landing platform on Coruscant, watching the ship rise into the morning sky. She felt Revan through their bond, felt his determination and his fear and his love, felt the distance growing as he jumped to hyperspace, felt the bond stretching across light years but not breaking. "Come back to me," she whispered to the empty sky. "Whatever happens out there, find your way home." The Force offered no promises, no guarantees, only the knowledge that some journeys had to be undertaken regardless of cost. Above Lehon, the debris field that had been the Star Forge drifted in eternal orbit, the twisted metal and broken dreams slowly spreading apart. The dark side energy that had saturated the station dissipated, the wound in the Force finally healing. Future generations might find those ruins and wonder what had happened here, what choices had been made, what prices had been paid. Malachor 5 remained a shattered memorial to the Mandalorian Wars' end, a planet torn apart by the mass shadow generator, a graveyard for millions. The dark side still clung to those ruins, but it was fading, slowly, the Force flowing back toward balance, healing even the deepest wounds given enough time. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant stood illuminated against the night sky. Inside its halls, masters meditated on lessons learned through catastrophe. Younglings trained in lightsaber forms, too young to remember the wars, but inheriting their consequences. The archives preserved knowledge of what had happened so future generations might learn from past mistakes. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, people went about their lives. Farmers planting crops, merchants negotiating deals, families gathering for evening meals. The simple acts of living that continued regardless of wars and empires and cosmic threats, the foundation beneath all the grand conflicts, the reason any of it mattered. The Force flowed through all of it, light and dark, in eternal dance. Neither victorious because both were necessary. Peace found not in eliminating darkness, but in choosing light despite darkness's constant presence. Revan's ship disappeared into hyperspace, carrying him toward unknown dangers and uncertain fate. But behind him, the galaxy he had saved twice over continued turning, life persisting, hope enduring, proof that even the worst darkness could not extinguish the light permanently. The story of the Jedi Civil War ended here, but the story of the galaxy continued, as it always had, as it always would. One chapter closing, another waiting to be written by choices not yet made, by heroes not yet born, by conflicts not yet imagined. The Force was with them, always, in darkness and in light, in war and in peace, in endings and in beginnings. And somewhere in the unknown regions, a Jedi who had been a Dark Lord walked alone toward a threat that might destroy him. But he walked anyway, because that was what heroes did, not because they were certain of victory, but because they could not live with themselves if they did not try. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and patient, watching civilizations rise and fall, bearing witness to triumphs and tragedies without judgment, the cosmic stage on which countless stories played out across millennia. This story was finished, but the galaxy's story continued, forever evolving, forever changing, forever offering new chances for redemption, new opportunities for heroism, new possibilities for hope. And that was enough. That had to be enough. Peace settled over the galaxy like stardust falling gently through the darkness, fragile, temporary, but real. And in that peace, life found a way to continue, to heal, to grow stronger in the broken places. The Jedi Civil War was over. The galaxy endured, and the Force flowed on, eternal and unchanging, through all things, forever.